From another galaxy, from another world, comes the embodiment of fear.
What the hell was that?
Nightbeast, terror from beyond. A high-tech warrior from a distant planet. A killing machine with a taste for human flesh. A community abandoned in a code of silence.
Wicker never even called the state. They don't even know we have a bad situation here.
A love affair.
You know you're a very attractive girl, Lisa.
Two people brought together by the urgency of the moment. Two people torn apart by the savage fury of Nightbeast.
I'm sorry, Jamie. There was nothing that could be done.
The most vicious creature to ever span the intergalactic void has come to pay its respects. This is the story of how the little people answer the big questions. See the movie that will change the face of modern science fiction cinema. Nightbeast, terror from beyond.
Hello, everybody. We're here for a very special episode of Horror in 1982. We have a full house here to cover Don Dohler's cult favorite, Nightbeast from 1982, like I mentioned. Let me introduce all the guests here. First up, we have Bruce Holecheck, who does a bunch of commentaries and did the blogspot Cinema Arcana, which was full of it, knowledgeable stuff that we all learned about. How's it going, Bruce?
Great. Happy to be back to talk about a local favorite.
Yeah. Also want to thank Bruce for getting this good panel together to talk about Nightbeast. Next up is Chris LaMartina, if that is your real name. I haven't seen Chris in years since Cinema Wasteland. He is a Baltimore filmmaker. He directed stuff like WNUF, Halloween Special, and Call Girl of Cthulhu, both really great movies. How's it going, Chris?
Good, brother. How you doing, man? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, of course. Thanks for being here. And great to see some more Baltimore filmmakers. Then we have John Kinhart here, who directed Boobs, Blood, and Beast, the Don Dohler documentary, which is a really great doc, and I'd really like to see it get another release. How's it going, John?
Doing great. Glad to speak with everybody here today about Don Dohler and Nightbeast, one of my favorite Dohler films.
All right, and then we have two people from the actual film, which is great. We have Richard Geiwitz here, who's an actor, a writer, and the DP on a lot of early Don Dohler works. How's it going, Richard?
We're going great. Thanks for having me.
And last, we have actor Jamie Zemarel. How's it going, Jamie?
Doing very well. Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So, yeah, this is really cool. I'm going to let Bruce take off, unless we would want to kind of touch a little briefly about the pre-production on this. So, you know, Don Dohler is a pretty big cult icon in here, Baltimore filmmaker. And they originally tried to get this movie started after his first film, Alien Factor. There was some trouble. He had another guy actually take the reins to direct it, but plans fell through. He went for a simpler film and Fiend, an easier film, I should say. And then they came back to do Nightbeast. So here we go.
Yeah, so Dave Getty, a guy named Dave Getty, was the original director slated for Nightbeast. Don was only going to produce Nightbeast, the original aborted version. But apparently they just weren't getting enough footage in the can. And Don thought that, things weren't progressing as smoothly as possible. He said there was too many people involved. There wasn't really a singular vision. So they sort of cut their losses at some point and jumped into making Fiend, which he purposely designed as sort of like a stripped down production, very limited amount of special effects, limited characters, limited locations, which, Richard Geiwitz shot Fiend as well. So I'm sure he can speak to that. I feel like 80% of the movie takes place in like suburban Maryland wood paneled basements, which anyone that grew up in Maryland is very familiar with that site. but yeah, they kind of, their resources were running thin, so they wanted to at least get something out there. Alien Factor had sold well to TV, so that kind of they sort of wanted to follow suit with that. Whereas the rethought Nightbeast actually was aiming more towards the video market. Producer Ted Boas, he was one of the uncredited producers on this, and the following year he went on to do The Deadly Spawn, which is another favorite of mine. He had told me that he actually was one of the people that really kind of pushed Don to include marketable elements like some gore, some nudity, cussing, things like that, which weren't really Don's forte. Don was really kind of anchored into this older sort of style of filmmaking, someone who grew up watching 50s monster movies and stuff like that. So Alien Factor was seen more as like a homage to that sort of stuff compared to Nightbeast, which was much more 80s. So Richard, I guess, how did you get involved with Don originally? I mean, you had a small role as Pete in Alien Factor, and then you went on to shoot Fiend. Were you involved in the aborted version of Nightbeast as well?
Yeah, I was basically, it's more of a grip, I guess. I did one short film with Dave Getty, and everything went well. I thought Dave was a good filmmaker and all that, and I didn't have a specific job on the short. He just said to me one day, he said, "I just like having you around to help out and do things." And the aborted version of Nightbeast was kind of the same way. I was shooting production stills, and I would work with the Dave Donahoe's smoke effects and that kind of thing, assisting here and there. So I didn't have a specific job. When Fiend came along, then Don offered me the DP job. But Nightbeast, I was just kind of helping out. I guess a grip, basically.
Richard, I read that Dave Getty was trying to do much more elaborate camera moves and created all kinds of rigs to achieve these elaborate moves. Do you have any recollection of some of the ambitious shots he was trying to do?
Yeah, there were a few of them. And again, in this level of filmmaking, as you just get in there and boom, 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 you shoot the scenes and go. And he was getting kind of elaborate. I remember one time where we were supposed to get a shot of the car with the lead actors in it driving by on the Beltway. And Dave had, it was he and I and a couple other people setting up a camera on the Beltway on the side, on the shoulder of the road. And the actors were supposed to drive by. I don't know if we really needed that shot. You could have gotten a generic shot of, cars driving by on the Beltway to establish the situation and then cut to the interiors. Anyway, we stood out there for a while. What we did not know until later was that the actors who were supposed to be in the car decided to go to a nearby diner and use the restroom real quick and get a cup of coffee and that kind of thing. So we were standing there, and finally, state trooper pulls up and says, "You guys can't stand on the shoulder of the road like this." And we had a camera set up and all that, which of course I knew was the case. But the trooper said, "You guys got to go." So we went, and this is before cell phones, so we couldn't talk to each other. We weren't sure where everybody was, and we finally hooked up again. And he was saying, why did you just drive by? Did you have to get a cup of coffee and all this stuff? So it was that kind of elaborate thing, which they didn't have to do. Like I say, go out, on a Beltway overpass, shoot a shot of traffic going by. Nobody's going to recognize the car anyway. But it was, again, that kind of elaborate thing where you're trying to be so exact, and you can't do that, in these kind of low budget horror films.
Yeah,
I do have a.
Go ahead.
I had a question about the 4x3, because Alien Factor is made for TV, so they shot it by 4x3. So when you went to do the Nightbeast the first time, it was 4x3 as well. Was that budgetary constraints? That one was made for TV, but when they picked up to refilm it, was there any thought of turning it to widescreen, or did they keep it so they wanted to reuse some of the old footage as well?
Well, so some of the old footage did get used, and some of it was pretty good. I mean, it was the stuff that he used was good quality stuff. I don't recall any discussion about trying to match it up so much with the first with the aborted Nightbeast, because I think he was just going to go in and shoot, just whatever he needed to do. It just so happened that some of the old stuff worked out with the burning spaceship and all that.
There is one more additional scene with Richard Nelson at the end. He's the character Krabs, and they blend the footage together by Stover first coming out and saying, "Krabs is driving me nuts." And then later there's a scene where I think it's the stunt performer, Dennis McGeehan. Right. He walks into the shot and you just see his back with flannel, and he grabs the gun and walks off. And then later they stitch in the footage shot in 1979 with Richard Nelson.
It seemed to me that what Don had said, and because I was there, but I can't remember everything exactly. But Don had said that he had grown a beard at that point, and you didn't want to shave his beard off just for basically one shot. So they kind of used it, just the shirt and his back and whatever. I can't remember exactly how that worked, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was kind of a long way around just to get Rick Nelson in the movie.
Yeah, and I think Nightbeast is really kind of the epitome of sort of ambitious DIY regional filmmaking. Obviously they're like you said, you guys were shooting off of 695 and stuff, and there obviously no permits or anything like that. To me, so my first introduction to Nightbeast, when Nightbeast first got on my radar, there was a magazine in the late 80s, I think it was late 80s, called Monsterland, which was sort of an offshoot of Famous Monsters of Filmland. They sort of brought it back for a year or two, a handful of issues. And there was I was a kid at News Center at White Marsh Mall, and there was a one-page ad in there for Nightbeast that had a couple of photos of the monster, some gore, and some copy on it that mentioned that it was, this bloodthirsty beast is, running around Baltimore or something like that. And I remember specifically as a kid just being like, they don't make movies in Baltimore. There's no horror movies in Baltimore. So even though I didn't see the movie until years later, that always stuck with me. The fact that somebody out there, made this monster movie in Baltimore. And Don kind of, as far as film fans go, he would kind of put himself on the map with his Cinemagic magazine, which was sort of, would offer sort of tutorials on how to produce special effects for these low budget movies. Because back then, everybody was shooting on Super 8, shooting these little films around. So there was like a whole generation of monster kids that worshipped this magazine. We had director Bob Tinnell on another episode we did this season called about Creepshow. He was a PA on Creepshow, and later went on to direct. Was it Frankenstein and Me? Is that what the name of that movie is, Chris?
And then the best Christmas movie, Feast of the Seven Fishes. Yeah,
exactly.
It's so
good. but yeah, he was he on that episode. He specifically called out Don's magazine, just saying how important and influential it was to him as a young backyard filmmaker. So I don't know, Richard or Jamie, do you guys want to talk about the early days of Don and the influence of that magazine?
Jamie, do you want to?
I don't know that I saw Cinemagic until, quite frankly, just about the time of Nightbeast, I think. I was collecting Famous Monsters of Filmland and Castle of Frankenstein and Eerie and Creepy and all this fun stuff. But Cinemagic kind of came around. I think I had like one issue of it. I don't even remember when I got it. But I was quite amazed, I think, when I saw it, and it was like, oh, God, this guy's, offering how to do this stuff. That's cool.
I feel like I could probably talk to that a little bit. I mean, I always make the comparison, and this analogy might get lost on some folks, but like I think what Don and that scene did in the 80s for low budget, micro budget regional filmmaking was similar to like Black Flag. Like when they blew up like tour plans for punk bands, or like introducing punk to different towns. Like what Don did in that era was very similar to like just like kicking the doors open for people to essentially grow and learn together. And I think, to speak to Cinemagic specifically, you have this sort of interesting connection where, you know, you have George Stover obviously ran, was his Cinema Cobb, but before then was Black Oracle. You had like the magazines that the Savelas were doing, Savelas who ran Midnight Marquee and then ultimately ran the first convention I went to, FanX.
Right.
But that whole scene, and I think what was really special about Baltimore horror to me is like, it's all very inclusive and people helped each other. Whereas I think a lot of cities, especially bigger cities, don't have that sense of community that ultimately Baltimore generationally benefited from that in a way that most places don't.
Right. And I mean, you look at, I was going to say, you look at the crew of this movie, you got people like Tony Malinowski working as crew persons on it, who then later went and did, you know, Night of Horror, which is horrible, honestly. But also
Curse the Cannibal. Yeah.
It is worse. Night of Horror is worse.
Yeah,
objectively worse. That's hard to say.
Curse of the Cannibal.
I'm glad you brought up Cinemagic, Bruce, because I think there would be no Nightbeast without Cinemagic. It really was the groundwork that laid Don's whole kind of first 5 films. At the point of Nightbeast coming out in 1982, Dohler had already been doing Cinemagic for almost 10 years, about 10 years, and a lot of the credits that you see in the movie, like Ernest Farino and Ted Bohas and so on, they were all contributors to these magazines. And you know, Don started out Cinemagic with, you know, just a lot of correspondence that he had with various other people and the local Washington D.C. Film Society and so forth, and people that he met through. What was it? What was the name of the convention that was science fiction convention in Baltimore, like FanX or something?
FanX, yeah.
Balticon was there. That
yeah,
was there.
Yeah. And so he took all those relationships he had and turned those people into filmmaking collaborators. And so by the time, you know, he got his start off with Alien Factor, which is great, you know, and you know, but somewhat technically flawed. And then he kind of honed it, you know, and took more delicate care of filmmaking with Fiend. And so by the time Nightbeast comes along, you know, he is like, you know, at a creative apex, I think, and willing to kind of take on some of the kind of bigger challenges that, you know, you see in the film, like some of the rotoscoping effects and sound effects and bigger, faster paced action scenes and so forth. And, you know, interesting to note, and maybe everyone knows this already, but Ernest Farino, who did the opening title effects and some of those kind of sparkle disintegration effects, you know, he is famous for creating the title effects of the first Terminator, The Abyss, Terminator 2, you know, Terminator 2 where it goes Terminator 2, and he also was the super effects supervisor on one of my favorite films, Lady in White.
Oh my gosh!
Also, look at J.J. Abrams getting involved,
right?
Nightbeast, and that was basically through that network that he had created through Cinemagic. And you know, it's not just a matter of finding people who can do a job. I mean, you can put an ad in the paper and get that, but it was he was almost able to look at people and know that there would be people that would be committed enough to make a film, especially work for free or for points or whatever. That magazine was just invaluable for that.
Right. And John, you scored an interview with J.J. Abrams for your documentary. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that came about? I mean,
sure,
he was a pretty big name at that point.
Yeah, it would have been just as Lost was kind of getting started, and so not as big as he, you know, is today, but on the rise. And I was actually going to be in California for another film festival for another film, and you know, a testament to everybody's love for Don Dohler. Anybody would do anything for him, and I think that's why he was such a successful filmmaker and made so many films. But you know, J.J. Abrams and his partner on Lost, his name escapes me at the moment. You know, they were just still big fans of Don Dohler, and so all Don had to do was basically just ask, "Would you know, my documentary filmmaker is going to be in town? Can he interview?" And they were like, "Sure." And so, you know, we showed up at the ABC Disney. I think it was ABC Disney. It was the Disney lot, you know, with the big studio, and went into the bad robot offices and, was given a room to set up and do an interview. And, he was very nice and very friendly and very appreciative of Don Dohler. And in the hallway, they had this beautiful Nightbeast poster hanging.
Yeah, and he did eventually, when the Blu-ray came out, he did buy a copy. Joe Rubin over at Vinegar Syndrome sent me a text. He's like, "Hey, JJ just bought a copy."
JJ Abrams did? Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
Very cool.
That Vinegar Syndrome piece is such a beautiful little set. So I appreciate, Bruce, all the work you did on that.
That shot on the cover is from the first Nightbeast, isn't it? The first shot on that cover. Is that one of the shots from the original Nightbeast? I think.
Yes, it was either test footage or it was.
I was going to say, I think it was like a costume test or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I believe. Tell me if I'm wrong, but the reason this happened is it because it was on Mandy?
No, I had actually been pushing Vinegar Syndrome to license it for a while.
Well, they got that deal with Troma, so
exactly.
Definitely going to be one they pick from Troma.
Yeah, there had been movies I've been pushing from that Troma deal for years, and Nightbeast was definitely one of them. And it was a little more problematic than expected because at first they were missing one of the reels of the negative. So Joe actually had to go up to Troma and root through all their shit to try to find that missing reel, and thankfully he finally turned it up. So hats off to them for doing it.
You know where that the Nightbeast final costume came from?
It was wasn't it like your motorcycle riding outfit or something
exactly.
like that?
It was my motorcycle rain suit.
Oh, that's interesting.
The one thing I do want to mention before we get away from that, so when you look at the early 80s, the late 70s had, Alien and Invasion of the Body Snatchers remake. So we're having that reoccurrence of the 50s. But if you look at Don Dohler, he was doing that stuff way before everybody. He was just into the sci-fi stuff. So Nightbeast fits perfectly in there with that recurrence of the 50s stuff. But he was just playing to his own beat. He wasn't doing it because it was it just feels like he was constantly doing that stuff. He's always interested in it. So a little bit ahead of his time, I think.
Yeah, and it's funny because, like we mentioned before, the movie does feel kind of like his movies always do feel like kind of homages to 50s things. But with this one being kind of a little bit more ramped up for the 80s, it is kind of a weird meshing of these elements. You get the character of Drago or Drago, I can't remember which, Don Leifert's character, and he feels like he stepped out of this juvenile delinquent movie. He's just talking all this, right? He's talking all this trash, and he's there's this great bit where he's taunting Tom Griffin, who plays the sheriff, Tom Griffith, where he's like, "You can go to hell." Or wait a second, that's too good for you. And just just some really funny bits in there. But it does kind of have that old, sort of a bit of a different mentality compared to what was booming at the time, which was 80s slasher movies, And here comes Don with just this funky little monster movie.
But I mean, they did have a lot of the sci-fi coming in at that time. You had The Thing, you had Extro, so it was really it was getting popular again, and more fantastical. But the violence and gore is pretty wild in that one, especially the opening. I think the first 15 minutes of Nightbeast hits really hard. It's actually it's incredibly action-packed and really terrifying because the alien just pops in and he doesn't give anybody a chance to say nothing, and 5 or 6 people are just dead like that.
Right, and that's what I like about it. It really does kind of hit the ground running, and it is really legitimately fast-paced. It's really a quick 81 minutes, and I also they don't shy away from the monster. He just shows up immediately, and there's a lot of them through the whole movie. And then, like you were saying, based on Don's earlier work, you start watching this, and you get a little worried that this is going to be a dry affair. No real gore or anything. He's kind of people are getting blasted with the laser guns, which is kind of leaving that black shadow outline of them, sort of shades of Hiroshima victims, or the recent Thunderbolts if you're a Marvel fan. But 10 minutes in, all of a sudden you get a dude getting his intestines ripped out for 3 minutes straight, and you're like, oh shit, maybe this movie isn't messing around.
Well, I'm curious about that though, because somebody mentioned earlier, maybe it was you, Bruce, the idea of Ted Bohus being involved in sort of pushing those more sort of like modern elements, but then he's not credited, right? Like he's uncredited.
Yeah,
is
I think he's uncredited.
Like, I never realized. I'm a huge Deadly Spawn fan, but I'm curious. Like, I think he's very largely like Ted. I'm saying he's very largely influential in that realm. I'm curious why he took his name off it. Was it try to like I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean,
It's
the
the
movie
same
had.
Yeah.
I was going to
And
say the
Deadly
movie.
Spawn and Nightbeast have the same opening.
They do. They totally do. I don't know if it was just a fact that he was kind of like an uncredited investor. He may not have had any actual input per se. I'm sure Don raised money for this wherever he could, and maybe Richard or Jamie can speak a little more towards that. I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, I know like Stover had money in it, and I think maybe Aunt Frith or somebody. But I think like I believe the budget was only like $14,000 or something, which is ridiculous. I'm like, I could fucking throw $14,000 right now.
Well,
I wouldn't make something as
Actually,
cool as Nightbeast.
The budget for Nightbeast is $40,000.
Oh well, that's a little different.
It was
I
10
remember
times
it's
the budget of
something-
Alien Factor.
And maybe Jamie or Rich or even John would know this, but like I remember, when Alien, and Georgia told me this years ago, when Alien Factor had sold to TV, they sort of thought like, okay, this is how much money we'll make, so let's reverse engineer budgets based off how much TV is picking up stuff for. So I was curious if the $40,000 budget was based off of something like, okay, we'll make it for 40 and then we can sell it for 60 or what, whatever what the economics were. But I'm just curious about how that worked out.
Right.
All the answers.
I don't know. I mean, the markets were changing. They did, the money for Alien Factor was just starting to come in, and they wanted to basically repeat the success of Alien Factor, and so that's how the movie went from being the aborted version script, where it's people going out to a remote house and this deranged alien shows up, and then these retrievers show up, these alien retrievers that take the mental patient alien away, and so after Fiend, the money starts rolling in for Alien Factor, and so they wanted to repeat that success. So they started talking about doing a remake or a sequel, but Don was kind of opposed to that. But then he started to warm up to the idea of like, well, maybe bringing back some of the same characters. And then somebody else suggested, hey, Nightbeast is a great title. Why don't we go with that? And Don's like, well, I still have the costume. And then, so that's why the movie is a sort of blend of the abandoned script and Alien Factor. But as far as money goes, there was also an arrangement with Quality Films with Pete Gary, the owner of Quality Films, and so they a lot of the Pete Gary I think was an investor, and so that was kind of maybe part of the budget. I'm not that stuff is not as clear to me. I don't know if anybody else knows anything about that.
Was that for like the processing or?
Yeah, I think processing, creation of work print.
Yeah, I just remember the budget being so low that $40,000 seems like a lot, but I would have thought it was less than 10 the way we're going. But maybe he had to pay people for using property or something like that. But film, of course. I think the CP16 that we shot it with, I thought was on loan, if I recall correctly. I don't know if he actually paid rental on that or not, but I could be wrong. But there's a lot. He called in a lot of favors on that.
Yeah. So Jamie, how did you get involved with the Nightbeast remake?
I knew Don Leifert, Drago, in college, and actually we were out at there used to be a couple swimming holes up in Cockeysville called Beaver Springs and Beaver Dam. And I think we were at Beaver Dam, and I ran into Don, and I said, just got to talking, and what's happening? He said, oh, we're doing another monster film. I said, oh, really? Cool. I said, you need anybody to run around in the background, get killed or anything? He said, well, talk to the director, producer, whatever, and see if we can use you. And I don't remember how long it was, but I got a call, I think from Don, like Dohler, and I think that he said, yeah, come on out to where did we shoot first, Rich? I was up in what's the name of it up there, and off of Schwann Road,
Oregon Ridge.
Oregon Ridge. That's where we first shot. And he said, yeah, come on up to Oregon Ridge. And we're going to be shooting I said, okay. What do I wear? And he said, just, look like a student. And I went, oh, well, all right. So I threw on the plaid shirt that you see there and me dying in, and a pair of jeans and my biker boots, and went up, showed up on the set, and met Don, and he handed me a script, and I went, oh, I have lines? And he said, yeah. You're one of the main characters. And I went, what? Holy shit. It's like, God, all right. Okay, sure. Yeah. What do I got to, hey, well, shit. All right. So that's how I got into it.
Yeah, you're pretty much the second lead in it. I would say maybe Tom Griffith is like the lead, but I mean, you're not far behind him. I mean, you're in a lot of scenes.
Yeah.
I'm curious how much
he said,
about the stunts.
Go ahead.
And the fight choreographing. Did you guys do that? You and Don plan all that out and stuff? Because it's pretty good. And I watch a lot of low budget movies and the fights are terrible. And I thought the fights are pretty solid in this movie.
I'm trying to recall. I don't think we had anybody telling us how to do it. I think we just kind of, choreographed it ourselves and said, Don, whoever was on the camera, was saying, we need, this angle, and, we got to plant the fist this way and so forth. I think I remember the log thing when it comes in and grab the log and hold on to it and all that crap. And, I think we just worked it out ourselves. Did
the stuntman Dennis McGeehan, did he play a role in any kind of choreographing of fights?
I don't remember. I do know, I was a motorcycle rider, but he didn't want me to ride his motorcycle. So when he comes bursting as me out of the forest to start the fight with Drago, that's him, not me. He wouldn't let me get on the bike.
I love that Drago throws his beer on the ground like he's ready to go. He throws the beer like he's going to fight, and then he just takes off. He tosses it and just runs.
Well, I'll tell you, Jamie, you got one thing you've never said in an interview was one of your big criticisms of Leifert playing Drago was about his footwear. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. I don't know any bikers who wear Dockers.
You think that was in a way his, like winking at the audience and saying, "Come on, this isn't really real," or do you think he just
maybe? I have no idea. I had on the biker boots. He did not.
He whooped his ass.
Do you guys want to talk about Don Leifert for a minute? He's unfortunately passed away, but I mean, he was pretty big in the Dohler-verse. He was the lead role in Fiend, in addition to being in this. So you guys want to talk about Leifert for a little bit?
Well, I'll just quickly say before Jamie jumps in is that I actually went to elementary school with him, amazingly, up until about 10th grade. And then he went to another school. Didn't see him at all until, I don't know, maybe 1973, something like that. I'm walking through the halls of Towson University through the arts department. And there he is. I mean, he kind of looked like just a larger version of himself from fourth grade, except he had, longer hair and all that. And I said, are you Don Leifert? And he goes, yeah. And then I told him who I was. He remembered who I was. And then, we got to talking from there. But then there was kind of a break. And then all of a sudden the Elegant Factor came up and he was in it. And so was I, which was kind of shocking. But Jamie, you and I were both there when Leifert was there in the theater department too, correct?
At Towson, yeah. At Towson University, yeah. That's where I met Don, was in college. And we hung out together a little bit. Of course, he was into monsters and horror and all that stuff, and I was into not necessarily all the monster films and everything, but I loved, like I said, I loved famous monsters of Filmland and all that fun stuff. I was more into the special effects than I was into a lot of the stuff.
So Jamie, your dad was an entertainer too. So I mean, did you know early on that you kind of wanted to get into the arts, acting or anything like that? Or I mean, you do stage work and musicianship now.
Yeah, I started in junior high, probably. I mean, theater-wise, got a small part in a show, and the acting bug bit me. And then, but I was also into music and rock and roll. I was in a rock and roll band back in the '70s, and then off and on. But I didn't really start doing theater full time actually until the '80s, when I just kind of said, okay, it's time to really try and make money at doing this rather than just doing it for fun.
Right.
Which I'm doing again now that I'm retired. I'm just doing it for fun. So, and that's where, like I say, I met Don when I got into college, and was doing shows there. And my father was a musician in Baltimore, Zemarel, and he had a big band called the Zemarel Orchestra. It was Tommy Dorsey, Glenn Miller swing band that I used to sing with all during the '70s and the '80s and into the '90s. When my father's health went down in the mid '90s, I took over the band for about a year and a half. Hated it. I'm not a manager. I'm a performer. I just want to show up, do my song, and get the hell out of there.
Right.
And so a couple of the guys in the band who were more business oriented took it over. And after that, I went and joined the Capitol Steps political satire group, and was with them until COVID hit. Joined them in the tail end of '94, and my last show was March of 2020. And then COVID rolled in, and everything shut down.
Right.
So that was, I was going to retire that year anyway, because I've been with them. It would have been the end of my 26th year come September of 2020. And I was going to make that my last year anyway. I was a little tired of political satire, and political satire had kind of changed a bit, shall we say, because of certain.
Well, it's practically reality these days. Jesus.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is that they were trying. The Capitol Steps were trying to get the ball rolling again, and they kept saying, "Yeah, we got a show here," and then it's booked 3 months out or whatever. And then we canceled because of COVID, and then we'd have another one, and they did it for all through the next year and whatever. And then the phone call that I finally got from one of the guys, Mark Eaton, was actually the day of the insurrection.
Jeez.
He said, we decided to throw in the towel. And I went, really? Today? With all the shit that's going on? You're now? You out of your mind? I said, you got a show tonight, man. What are you talking about? That was the end of that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, but didn't your father's band back Frank Sinatra one time?
There's that possibility. Zim also was a booker of musicians for when shows came through town. He would book the musicians because they would come with like the piano player, the drummer, and the bass player, and then they would hire local people in the union, and they had books, and these are guys who read and could, do it, just like that. And he'd hire the full orchestra that they needed. But they would usually not travel with a full orchestra, the shows. They would just come in with, like I said, just the main people. And for all I know, he did. When I was 8 years old, my father, before he became a band leader and musician, he was still a musician, band leader all his life. But he worked for Columbia Records for 25 years as a promotion manager. And when he first started, he was in the country section, and he used to take me and Mom to see the Grand Ole Opry when they came into town. Mm-hmm. And I got to meet Minnie Pearl and all the Earl and Scruggs and all the Jimmy Dean and everybody. And then they switched him over to the rock and roll section, which was more my speed when I got older, of course, once I became a teenager. And I got to listen to meet Loggins and Messina and people like that and everything. But he was always doing music, and he could have. Little story, we were playing a wedding at the Hilton in downtown Baltimore, and Tony Bennett walked in and got up on stage and sang about 3 or 4 songs. And of course, the bride and the mother just flipped out. They were like, "Oh my, we got Tony Bennett at our wedding." And he was good friends with Tony. Tony was a very, very nice man.
Was there a lot of like interconnectivity between like the music scene in Baltimore and the movies that Don and y'all were doing in like the 70s and 80s? Like, was there a lot of cross functionality at all?
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know anything.
Well,
I mean, they had.
Jamie, you said you were in a rock band, though, right? Because I'm thinking about like, there's a band. Is it Galaxy Invader that has the band in, or is that Alien Factor? I'm confusing
Alien
him
Factor.
now. Who is the band
that's
playing?
Alien Factor,
Alien
yeah.
Factor. Yeah, thank you.
And I think
It's Alien Factor that has the band
The bass
playing.
player was Don's brother, Glenn.
Right.
Yeah, I think he was playing bass.
Yes.
But I can't remember the names of everybody else. But I can't remember if they were an actual working band or not now.
Okay.
The band was just in Alien Factor were just people pretending to be in a band. The band that the music comes from, I think, is Atlantis, and the song is Maybe Someday. But an interesting band bit of trivia for Nightbeast is that the scene with Glenn, Don's brother, where he gets his guts ripped out, that was actually a scene that was added on to make the movie longer, because the completed film was only like 72 minutes. So they devised 2 scenes and ended up accidentally making probably one of the best scenes of the movie, which is Glenn's death. But in the B-movie horrors, the guide to Don Dohler's first 5 films, there's a quote from Glenn Barnes where he's talking about how that day that they did the guts ripping out scene, he was in a band with Larry Schlechter, who did effects for the film, and they just laid in their final mix for their band Lead and Silver, and then drove to the remote scene and stayed up all night shooting that scene. So I guess that is a little bit of a band filmmaker collaboration going on in Baltimore.
Well, and that scene has one. That scene has one of my favorite cutaways of the entire movie too, with Don's kids, Greg and Kim, I think, where they just like are peeking up over the fence. Exactly, right? They're just like watching a guy get his guts ripped out. They're like, once he's dead, they're like, enough of that, and get back down, and then get nuked in the car. That's one thing I do like about Don's
right,
movie,
yeah.
right. For Don's movies being so wholesome, he kills a lot of damn kids.
I was gonna say the same, and
including-
the Fiend too.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
The Fiend's
Fiend has
the
a
worst.
dead
He's
kid
like a
too,
serial
right.
killer. He's like a ghoul sucking their blood out. What exactly is the Fiend? Is he an alien or a dead alien thing? Like it's so
obviously he's a fiend. I mean,
yeah,
come
but
on.
what is a fiend? You know what I'm saying? What is it? Is it from space or is it not? Everything else from his movies is from space.
Right,
So
right.
like,
It has
from
like
space.
that weird space mosquito that comes down
yeah.
and like inhabits
just
the
goes
corpse,
in the corpse.
It's a space mosquito.
So funny enough, when we were, I did the commentary for Fiend with Richard and George Stover, and at the time nobody could remember where the hell that cemetery was from the intro. And crazy enough, John actually found that cemetery years later by doing some like serious filmic archaeology.
Yeah, and Gravedigger wasn't there, was he?
It was, when the Blu-ray came out, there was a couple people on the Don Dohler, Facebook fan page that were saying, "Does anybody know where this is?" And I checked B-movie horrors. You'd think that would be where you'd find it, but it wasn't in there. It's not listed on the IMDb film locations, and so I popped in the new Blu-ray and I thought, well, maybe there's something on a tombstone I could search on the internet. And funny enough, that scene normally in previous releases was tinted day for night. So,
right.
It was darkened and made blue. And so you wouldn't normally be able to read anything on that, on the tombstones. But on the new release, it didn't. It was clear. It didn't have that treatment. And so I just was able to make out a name, and looking up that name led me to find the location. And actually, there's an interesting story about that, and I'm actually making a short film about it, and it's going to be called Secret of the Fiend Graveyard. So, and I don't want to reveal what exactly I find, but in the process of trying to find this film location, I discovered this other coincidental story of something that's hidden inside the opening credits of Fiend.
Can't wait. So this will be a good spot. So Jamie and Richard have already talked about their intro to Don. But what about you newer guys? So Dave, John, and Chris, like, how did Don Dohler first get on your guys' radar?
first time I saw Don Dohler was I went to the Borders in Towson, and because I'm always like going through the movies and seeing what do I not know, always buying movies blindly, never seeing them before, and I pulled a movie off the shelf. It was The Alien Factor. On the back it said, aliens invade Baltimore. So I was like, okay, I'm checking this out, and went home, popped it in, was pretty impressed by how many monsters it had in it. And then it was like sometime maybe in the next year, Michael Yokel's article in the City Paper, Fast, Cheap, and Out of This World, came out, and it was like the cover article, and it kind of laid out Dohler's life story and his background in underground comics, and how that led him to doing Cinemagic. And so I used Michael Yokel's article as almost like a framework for creating my documentary. So it was just like out there in Baltimore. It was just in the ether, just waiting to be found. And that was right about the early 2000s, and even before I even started making a documentary about Don, I met him at Horror Find, one of the very early Horror Finds, which was at BWI. And somewhere I have my I have an album with a picture of me and Don together from I think it was might have been 2003, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't approach him to start making a documentary until 2004. So.
Well, what's interesting to me about your documentary is that it starts off as just sort of a chronicle of a no-budget production. But then as it goes on, the trajectory kind of shifts because your subject literally finds out he's dying, like as you're making the movie. Yeah. So it's really an interesting, I think that really kind of adds a different angle to your documentary than most of these sort of low-budget movie profiles.
Yeah, I was influenced by American Movie. That was to me like a proof of concept that you could make a film about, somebody who's like a, low budget filmmaker, and that the story could still be good. And so I meant the film to be, I don't know, kind of lighthearted and fun, behind the scenes of seeing a film made while also kind of learning this filmmaker's history. And so I never intended it to kind of have this like very heavy, ending, and caught all of us by surprise.
Right.
But Chris, how about you take the question? How did you first discover Dohler?
I want to comment on something, and then I'm gonna. So it's funny, the Blood, Boobs, and Beast being the title, and that whole dynamic between Joe and Don. Basically, it's funny. I think Joe Ripple always feels like he becomes off like, I wasn't trying to make it super exploitation heavy, but like the funny thing about that, I think about that through the lens of Nightbeast, is like his other foray into making a little bit more of an exploitation horror movie. I think it's so interesting to what ultimately Time Warp would do with Don and Joe. But okay, so. My introduction to is I vaguely knew who Don was when I was 14 and I'm 40 now for context. So when I was 14, I made this movie that I met Bruce through. I made this slasher movie called Amerikill, and I remember walking around FanX. The first time I went to FanX, I met Ted Bohus because he was selling copies of Deadly Spawn, like VHS tapes still had, and I actually have a poster from that. But anyway, I remember walking up to Don's table, but Don wasn't there, and Stover was there. And I don't think I've ever told Stover this story, actually. I remember being a 14-year-old kid and having no money and being like, hey, will you trade stuff on your table for this movie I made? And like Stover looking at me like I was like the biggest like idiot, or like trying to scam him somehow. But long story short, the first Dohler movie I saw, believe it or not, was I think it was Stakes, because it was playing Horror Find, and I saw that, and that was like I really thought it was cool because I recognized locations, and I was like, holy shit, people are doing this here. But then the first of the original movies that I saw was because it wasn't easy to find that stuff. I mean, like video stores at that point in Baltimore, there were a handful of independent video stores. It was really Hollywood Video and Blockbuster. Right. So like finding an original Dohler movie on VHS was not going to happen very easily. And I think probably right before Retro Media started re-releasing stuff. But the first one I saw was Galaxy Invader, because it was on a double feature with I want to say Garden of the Dead. It was like one of those Dollar Tree or Dollar Store DVDs. Right. And if memory serves, I think George told me this, and I'll get to that connection quick because I know I'm taking forever. I don't think it was supposed to be licensed on that double feature. I think somebody assumed that Galaxy Invader was public domain, and it wasn't. Right. And that was one of those titles that we got done. But no, I mean, like being in Baltimore and making low budget horror movies, and then Stover being a horror fan, like he hit me up when he saw something about one of my other movies in local press, and he said, "Hey, are you shooting anything soon?" And he was the first movie we made with George was a movie called Grave Mistakes. But then George, like literally, he would just it would basically be like every time I came to his house, he'd give me a stack of DVDs he was in. You know, so like I got Nightbeast, Fiend, and Alien Factor. I think every time I got like diner food with him, basically, I showed that, and then he did this great thing. I'm sure you guys all have it, like a scrapbook of all the movie appearances on a DVD-R of like stuff that like they, you know, like news appearances or basically his DVD scrapbook and like just amazing stuff. So if you don't have that, let me know. I'll get one from George for anybody who wants one.
That's funny. Yeah, and anytime I'm watching a movie and I see George pop up, I'll take a photo off my TV screen and text it to him, just like, hey, look who I'm looking at. You know, if I'm watching like Dracula's Widow or like Attack of the 50-Foot Centerfold or like any of this shit that he's in. So it's always fun to see him pop up and stuff.
Now, thinking the first time I saw a Dohler movie would have to be Nightbeast. That Trauma DVD came out, and I don't remember if I had I know I had the original DVD edition, but I did see the documentary too, Blood, Boobs, and Beast, pretty close to when the DVD came out. But I do remember seeing, I think I watched Alien Factor probably 10 years ago for the first time. But I've seen like all his first 5 films for sure. And I'm thinking Nightbeast had to be the first one. And I must have seen it when that DVD came out, because I've always been big into monsters in the early, I don't know, probably 20s, you know, probably like how long I've been doing this, 17, 18 years. Big voracious appetite for horror movies. So I pretty much watched all the indie stuff and went down the line. And that's probably, I don't know if I saw a LaMartina movie before I saw a Don Dohler movie. When did Witch's Brew come out? Is Stover in that one? That might have been my first Stover movie.
Probably 2012 maybe.
Yeah.
We shot it in 2010, but I think it came out much later because of Media Blasters. But yeah,
that's when indie movies were good. But I used to buy them all. But I definitely saw Nightbeast early on, and then I saw Alien Factor, and then it would probably be I don't remember. It'd be Fiend, maybe? It's hard to say, but I've never seen the first 5. I think the last one I probably saw was Galaxy Invader. Mm-hmm. But,
Yeah, so, I mean, his stuff is, like, to me, you know, sometimes you'll see these, you know, his movies on lists of, oh, you know, so bad it's good, or, you know, oh, you know, look at this cheesy movie and stuff. But, you know, even just rewatching it last night, I don't understand any of that. I mean, to me, it's a legitimately really cool little movie. I mean, it's full of, you know, miniatures and models and monsters and fights and,
it's
you know,
sincere.
I mean,
you know,
its heart's in the right place. You know, it doesn't make fun of it. You know, it never feels condescending to the genre. And like I mentioned before, you know, the movie books. So to me, you know, I mean, there's almost no fat in it. So I don't understand people that can watch this and not think that it's awesome, you know?
I struggle with that stuff a lot with low budget movies generally, because I think most human beings that aren't filmmakers don't give any points for ambition or the fact that, like, and that's why I love movies that have this community. Like, I think people hear a Baltimore accent. You can probably hear a little bit of mine, but like when I say on, that's when people can hear the accent. But like, look, I mean, a Baltimore accent makes you 20 like IQ points lower than you are. So like, I feel like when people see a Don Dohler movie or even like an early John Waters movie, it's like when people are talking like Baltimore folks, like they go, "Who are these fucking idiots?" You know, like it just like, oh god.
I worked very hard to get rid of my Baltimore accent. First thing I think one of my teachers said to me when I got into college was, "We got to get rid of the Baltimore O." And I went, "You know, what are you talking about?" She said, "You said ew." I said, "No, I don't. I do not say ew."
Whenever I watch Nightbeast with my friends, I always play the "Come On, drinking game." Like anytime somebody says "Come on" in Nightbeast, you got to take a drink, and they say "Come on" a lot.
Right. I was gonna say Probably shit-faced by the end, right?
Regional films are always just the most fun because they have the most heart. And I would put early Romero movies in there too. You say the same people pop up. And we mentioned this has a lot of similarities to like Evil Dead, where Dead Next Door is the one I was thinking of, because we have Raimi as a secret producer on that. We had Ted Bohas, secret producer on that. They just have a lot of regional quality that I've always loved. That was Akron. So I'm from Toledo. So Ohio kind of love there. I like that kind of stuff. I always have. You see the same people pop up and there's genuine heart and they're not like anything else. Sometimes stuff becomes photocopied crap. This has its own flavor. You're not going to see anything else. And I don't mean that as like, oh, it's like a backhanded compliment, because I literally love these kind of movies because it's genuinely sincere. The special effects don't look like anybody else's, but they're good. And this one has special effects that a lot of people wouldn't do, like the squib on Don Leffert. When it blows up, he's not wearing a shirt. And that was a choice right there, to have him get blown up like that when you see his guts. That's rare. Usually squibs on skin's not typically a thing. And that was great effects, too.
Well, yeah, and I mean, the movie, like Chris mentioned, is super ambitious. And the thing about regional filmmaking that I love is that the people, especially in the case of Don Dohler, they wanted to make movies. It didn't come from like a cynical, sort of like cash grab, like the way some of these movies are, where it's, just a bunch of people that owned a furniture store were just like, oh, movie rentals are big, let's make a horror movie. Like this, everybody that was involved with this, I feel like, did it because they love doing this stuff. And I'm sure Jamie and Richard can attest to that. But I think it is kind of a different mentality,
Yeah, again, it goes back to that Cinemagic magazine kind of vetting and networking and that kind of thing. It's just that everybody just wanted to make a movie. And I mean, they could actually have a finished movie that could be projected on the screen. You're going to lose a lot of quality because you only have minimal amount of money, but you've done it.
Right.
And everybody is making all these 5-minute films and all that. And Jamie and I did that. Some even a little longer than 5 minutes, but never a feature film that ends up on TV or in a video store or whatever. So yeah, that's right.
Well, and that's what I think is so interesting. It's something about Dohler's career that I never realized until I saw John's documentary. Like, look, I just love people that get shit done. And like the fact that Don had like that, was it a Pro Junior character that turned to this thing? Or like all the people in the Baltimore ecosystem of horror stuff, like, oh, they ran a horror convention, or oh, they made this like Cinemagic, or, a Minda Marquee. They made something happen. To your point about just like, it might not be perfect, but we did it. And I think that's so inspiring, and like something that doesn't exist as often as it used to, even 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I think a lot of like people just aren't as actively creating stuff as they must. They do things on their phone and that's it.
All right, should we maybe go down through like some of the cast and crew and get Jamie and Richard's memories on some of these people?
Yeah, but before we hop into that, I do want to mention that it seems like Don Dohler gave a lot of people their starts, and there's a lot of people that went on that worked on this movie. They did stuff before, but they worked on this movie. They went on to do a lot of other things too. Of course, J.J. Abrams, but they seem to all come through with passion. You know what I mean? They don't seem jaded. Another people worked on this. He worked on the spaceship sequence. Is Philip Cook. And I know him from his movie Despiser, which is the definition of an ambitious, it's rough around the edges, but it's so sincere. It's awesome. Like, I was watching this, and you would think from that time with the CGI, you're like, this is going to be crummy, but the story's so good. I was like, this is genuinely a really great low-budget film. And from that time, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to say about a lot of them. So
I mean, the CGI is pretty crummy in that one.
Yeah, but the story's so cool. It's a plot I've never seen, which is rare for me to say that, But yeah. Definitely want to hop into the cast, right? And memories and everything.
Sure. So I guess first listed. I literally just cut and pasted this right as we were starting from the IMDb, Wikipedia. So of course we have Tom Griffith as the bushy-haired, mustachioed sheriff. Do you guys want to give some talk about him?
Go ahead, Rich.
Well, I'll just quickly say I worked with him. He was one of those guys that when Don put cast and crew together, I think Don kind of had a sense of personalities, and he knew that people would get along. You know, kind of a mellow personality, hardworking people, and that sort of thing, that would ultimately get the job done, and get along together. We didn't really have any real problems on the set. I mean, there was issues with the Dave Getty period, but outside of that, Tom Griffith is just one of those very nice guys. He was very easy to get along with, and you know, like with Alien Factor. Jamie, you worked closer with him on Nightbeast, though.
Nightbeast, yeah. I mean, I don't really remember that much, and of course, I met him for the first time on that film, and then when the film was over, you know, we didn't stay in contact or anything like that. Although I've been friends with him on Facebook and talk back and forth every now and then, but I didn't know that much about him or his history or anything like that. He, in retrospect, when watching the film, is one of the ones who definitely has a Baltimore accent.
And of course, the famous error that he apologized for to Don later, because it was when he shot the film, that whole curly hair thing was in style. And then by the time the movie came out, it was out of style. It was that quick.
Oh, you know, how many movies are like that? How many films can you go back and watch that, you know, Hollywood made? And
right.
People were wearing hairstyles and leggings and you know, all that stuff, and then, you know, you go back and go, what the hell did they have on? You know, when I think back to the 60s, what the hell was I wearing, for Christ's sake? You know. So.
I mean, it really just kind of it does add kind of a distinct bit of character to his character. You know, there's you see him appear on screen, you're just like, what is this guy? And especially, like, I know there's a lot of talk. You know, when the Blu-ray came out, there was a lot of reviews that I'd see online, and people would just mention, one of the most ridiculous sex scenes you'll ever not want to see. And of course that is with, you know, Griffith and what's her name? Karen Cardian. Who was, I believe, was it Don's aunt's hairdresser or something that they talked into being into this movie? Right. And apparently the story was that Tom, you know, they decided they wanted some more nudity in the film. So Tom was like, well, you know, maybe we can do a love scene. And Don's like, I'm not asking her to do that. It's my aunt's hairdresser. And he's like, well, I'll do it. So apparently Tom got like shit-faced. Just to get up the courage to go up to her and be like, you know, will you get naked for this movie? But apparently she went along with it. And while, you know, she's, you know, obviously a pretty young woman, the minute that you see Tom Griffith's bare ass, you're just kind of like, what the heck is this movie? So really funny scene.
Not as bad as Bill Heinzman though in Revenge of the Flesh Eater.
Oh God, that's hilarious. Yeah.
Well, I never met my so-called girlfriend.
Oh, hold on.
I was going to say, I never met my so-called girlfriend that Drago ends up strangling to death. Where, you know, where she had that scene where she got naked and everything. And I'm going like, hey, I don't even know this girl, for crying out loud. You know, so.
It's funny, you know, you mentioned that when we met up, you know, when I was doing extras for the Blu-ray. Yeah, you mentioned that. And when I went back and rewatched the movie last night, I was thinking that as I'm watching it. And yeah, there's like, even when they find her corpse, right? You guys are never in the same shot together, right? Yeah, so it's actually, it's
no
really
lines,
funny.
no scenes together, no love scenes, no nothing.
So yeah, it's really funny how it's all cut together. Like, you know, you end up, you know, when you go to visit her in her little cabin or tiny house or whatever, right. You know, it just has you going up, opening the door, going inside, but no scenes with you guys
knocking on the door, going inside, and then coming back out again.
Right.
I was like, why are they leaving? Just wait the 5 minutes and give her a ride. That's what I always thought. Just wait 5 minutes. And I know it was like, obviously she wasn't in that actual building, all that kind of stuff that people that don't like and never made movies or worked on movies would never get that. You know what I mean?
Right. So Richard, was it weird? Was it weird shooting that sex scene, or I mean, because you know it was kind of new territory for a Don Dohler movie, or was it just business as usual? Or
well, you kind of approach it business as usual. It strikes me though, and I don't know if you remember Jamie or not, but it seems to me she was a local exotic dancer, maybe, or something. I could be wrong about that,
Well, I don't know. I knew she was a hairstylist, but I didn't know if she was a.
Well, Karen was a hairstylist. I can't remember about her though. She anyway, her husband was there for the shooting. I remember that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it was Rick Neff, passed away a number of years ago, and I remember, of course, Don Leifert's playing Drago, badass, this, that, and the other, and like between shots, he would go to Rick Neff, her husband, say, Rick, you sure you're okay with this? I mean, I was sorry, I say, Don, look, it's a movie, don't worry about it. Just go, are you sure? Are you really? It was that kind of thing, and but then as soon as the camera goes, then he's a badass again. So
you're talking about the actress that played Jamie's girlfriend in the movie?
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
I thought you were talking about Karen Cardian. I'm sorry.
No,
the other
Karen
girl,
Cardian, yeah.
the girl was the girl who was my girlfriend. Was the exotic dancer?
I believe she was, and then
okay. No, like I said, I never met her. I have no idea what the hell she did.
I was gonna say now Jamie's doubly angry.
Yeah, really. I could have caught a show downtown or something.
Exactly. Or
you got to support your coworkers.
Really. Support the arts, for crying out loud. Yeah.
One thing about shooting that scene, and I think Don says it in the commentary track, how small that place was.
Right.
I can't remember it was so small. I was either sitting on the windowsill. They had to open the window up so I could move the camera back far enough to get a wide shot.
I was going to say you shot from the outside, maybe.
Well, I think I may have done that on some of the shots, going outside, and they had the camera set up shooting in, because this was like, 8 phone booths put together. I mean, it was almost nothing.
I know. I mean, it just looked like the whole room was her bedroom. The size of the room I'm in right now, probably like 10.
But yeah,
that with Monica Neff and Don Leifert was shot 2 different ways. One for TV and one that he was gonna rip her clothes off, and there was gonna be more nudity and there was gonna be more violence. But Dohler actually felt that the more restrained version played better, so they abandoned the more violent, explicit version of that scene.
Well, of course, at that time too, there were a lot of horror films had added so much sexuality to it. Like through the 70s, what was his name? Jess Franco in Spain, I believe, did a lot of that, and so that would kind of fit with that. But I don't know if it would have fit with the Dohler mystique of like you say, restraint.
So then we have, of course, we've talked George Stover, we've talked Don Leifert. What about Anne Frith, who played Ruth? She was involved in quite a few Dohler movies as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was on that one film and knew everybody that I did scenes with, but didn't really have a relationship with anybody other than Don Leifert actually, and Rich and Chris Gummer, who played the monster.
Yeah, I actually, it's funny. I actually invited Chris to join us for this, but unfortunately he was booked tonight, so he couldn't make it.
One thing about Anne Frith too, because I think she was originally from New York, wasn't she? And everybody had a Baltimore accent, but she kind of sounded like she was from New York. In all those movies. But she was very nice. She came prepared. Very pleasant person. Just a pleasure to work with.
Right. Then we have Eleanor Herman, who was kind of the bombshell in the movie. She kind of played the ditzy girlfriend of the mayor. She another Don Dohler regular. And she actually went on to have a career as a novelist. Pretty successful career, I believe. So what do you guys remember about her? Do you have any scenes? No, you do have some scenes with her because you bust up the pool party, Jamie.
Yes, yeah. Eleanor actually was Chris's girlfriend for a while, wasn't she?
Yes.
Yes. Chris Gummer, the monster. She was the monster's girlfriend for a while. I knew her through Chris and everything. But again, not that many scenes together or anything, and then not like we hung out afterwards or anything. for me. So most of the people in the film I'm not that familiar with in regards to their their other life and so forth. Rich might know them better.
Yeah, I think with Eleanor, she played, like you say, a ditzy type person, but in fact, she was extremely intelligent. She was the kind of, person who, she ended up going to Towson University for a while. She may have graduated from there, but she could have gone to Hopkins. She could have gone to Harvard. I mean, she was, an extremely intelligent person, even though you wouldn't know it from watching that movies and both of the movies. And I had worked with her, had some scenes with her in Alien Factor as well. And I can't remember how old she was then, maybe 16 when that started, 15 or 16 or something like that. But she was very mature. Her sister became, slightly famous because she was a very good artist, but she had a career painting the pets of, I guess, wealthy people. So it's kind of talk about a niche market.
Right.
But, she pulled it off, and, they were both very, very pleasant. They were from Roland Park, which is, of course, an old money area in the Baltimore area. But they were both very pleasant. They were down to earth, and Eleanor fit in very well with all of us blue collar idiots that were working the film.
Well, and
Eleanor
it's funny.
Herman-
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Eleanor Herman's mother was a talented portrait artist, and the scene that the interiors of the mayor's house was shot in Eleanor Herman's mother's house, and so there's various portraits that you see are her mother's work.
Yeah, I think there's one of Eleanor, I believe, or at least it looked like her. Yeah. It's funny because it's you talk about her coming from a little bit more of an upper class background. She still has that Baltimore accent. There's points where she full on sounds like she stepped out of a John Waters movie. She's, come on, Birdie, come on, and just yeah.
Don't call me Birdie.
Right. Which then, of course, leads us to Dick Deisel, better known as Count Gore Duvall. So he was a DC horror host. And I'm assuming that's how he got involved with Don, or the other way around. I don't know if Don reached out to him just from his, knowing of him being a regional horror host. But he's still around doing his shtick. He's down at the AFI Silver in Southern Maryland. He introduces movies down there. Where John, I think you just programmed a series of movies down there as well. But yeah. So he's kind of like I don't want to say a local legend, but he kind of is. So what do you guys remember about the Count?
Well, Jamie, you had a couple of confrontations with him in Nightbeast, right?
Oh, you're asking me to remember? I can't remember that. Was Dick ever a disc jockey?
Yeah.
I
thought so, because that voice, he had a real disc jockey voice. I mean, a real announcer voice.
Mm-hmm.
And he was perfect for television, and I just didn't know if he had a radio career also. But I used to watch Count Gore Duvall when I could get it on the television, because that was channel 20 out of DC, and I was in Baltimore, in North Baltimore, and the only, of course, back then the only channels we all got was 2, 13, and 11, which was ABC, NBC, CBS, and then of course channel 4, 5, 7, and 9 were all out of DC, and you were you're lucky if the ionosphere was working that night.
Right.
I think Dick DJ'd events. But there's a great documentary about Count Gore Duvall and all his, Captain 20 and was he Bozo the Clown, or one of the clowns. Every Other Day is Halloween by Curtis Prather. So if you want to know the behind the scenes story of Count Duvall and Dick Deisel, then Every Other Day is Halloween. I think that might even came out on Blu-ray a year or two ago.
I'll have to check that out. Yeah, because it's I didn't watch him. I didn't get the DC stations as well. When we were growing up, it was like channel 54 in Baltimore, and I think 45 was a DC station. Maybe that was one of the DC UHF stations.
No, 45 was Baltimore,
and then 5 was DC. Maybe, or am I?
5 was 4, 5, 7, and 9 were all DC.
Okay.
But UHF channels were, 45 was Baltimore with Captain Chesapeake. I can't remember that actor's name, who also
Right.
did the Ghost Host.
Yeah, I was gonna say Ghost Host was the big one I remember, right?
Or shall I say Ghost Host, hon?
Ghost Host.
But Ghost Host was such a ripoff, though, because he never actually did segment. He overdosed.
It was the same film. It was the same film every year, every week. They just did it once, so they never had to do it again. And then all he did was the voiceover, and and the guy had a beard, so all you saw him, was moving around in the shadows and taking things, mixing them up, and everything. You didn't see his voice or anything. And then he said, "This is your ghost host coming to." But you couldn't see his mouth, and you had him in the shadows. So it was WB had a lower budget than Nightbeast. What can I say?
Yeah, definitely not Don Dohler caliber stuff there. Not ambitious.
Right.
See, I was kind of lucky growing up because I lived on a hill, so we got Channel 20 actually very clear back in the old days, and we even got Channel 26, which was public TV in DC. And so, I got to see Gore a lot. One thing that he brought, now that I think about it, it seems to me Eleanor Herman was maybe a member of his fan club or something. Maybe that's how that all hooked up with Don Dohler. And but one of the good things about him is, he was a real pro. He came in, he knew his lines. Acting was, like Jamie, you're always famous for low-key film acting, and Dick Dizell was more like, that kind of thing. So he's a little over the top, but he always had the character nailed. He always had the lines down, and he was a good guy to work with, and he actually had a passion for what we were doing. And the one famous time I remember he used to talk about how we were just running out of film, and without the film we had to eliminate scenes or parts of scenes because we just didn't have the film to shoot it. And Don was just tearing pages out of the script, and Dick was saying, I learned all these lines, and you're getting rid of them like that. Dick, we don't have the film to shoot it, so again goes back to the passion of that kind of filmmaking.
Right.
The one thing I am curious about is when you guys put Nightbeast up to other 1982 horror movies, like the thing at the time when you were watching a lot of horror movies, what were the kind of big inspirations? What did you guys like at the time in the early 80s? Any big films you liked a lot?
It's a very good question. The Halloween movies had come out. They started to come out, and so you had kind of limited location, kinds of stories, and not like The Exorcist.
Everybody watched The Exorcist. That was a huge hit, but that was more of a big.
That was 74.
Something like
The Exorcist. Yeah, it was like 74. Pretty great. Yeah. But 80s for me, I was not really into the slasher films. I actually worked with, even though I can't even think of the name of the damn film where all the kids are at the camp. What's it called?
Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th. I actually worked with Jason's mother,
Betsy Palmer.
Betsy Palmer. That's right. I was in the national tour of Gigi, and she was Aunt Alicia in there, and she told us the story of how she just did the movie because she needed a new car and signed for a flat fee of like $15,000. She said if she had known, of course, that it was going to do what it did, she would have signed for a percentage. But she just thought, this is a low budget horror film. It's not going to make any money. And I think she got $14,000 or $15,000 for the film. That was it. Yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
That's funny.
No, I know his favorite movie.
What happened?
West Side Story. So, but his films are so inspired by classic sci-fi, like It Came from Space and all those Outer Space, all those classics like that. So I'm curious when he's making his movies and you guys are watching that stuff. You guys are all into that stuff. I'm curious if you seen The Thing or if you guys had any affinity for any of the stuff Poltergeist going on around the same time, or you guys are more focused on your own films.
Yeah, well, we had that, and of course, now that I think about it, you had the Omen came out in, was that 76 or 77, somewhere around there. So there was a run of good horror films with good actors. I mean, you have Gregory Peck and those kind of guys. I mean, that's always good. So, yeah, I think I mean, I kind of really loved Ray Harryhausen movies growing up, and of course, you know, the Karloff Frankensteins and you know, Bela Lugosi and all that. You know, before you had you know, cable TV and streaming and all that, you were completely reliant on whatever movies were being shown late at night, like on Saturday nights when all your friends get together and all that. Exactly. Of course, Hammer horror, you know, that was a big deal. And
I definitely was leaned more towards special effects films like The Thing. That blew my mind. I remember when I went to see it, I just was like, oh my God, you know, the guy's ripping his head off and falling down the table and turning into a spider. What's going on? Wow. Yeah. And just the whole, the blood squirting, I jumped. I think I was more special effects driven rather than slasher horror stuff. That never really did it for me that much.
Right. And I do have one more question for each of you. So, Richard, any favorite DPs out there where you looked at their work and you kind of mimicked, or you were inspired to do that kind of stuff?
I don't know. I don't think anybody inspired me to, you know, shoot the way I shot. I mean, I used to be a fan of Owen Roizman, who did French Connection and some of those. It was very gritty.
Yeah, I was gonna say more of a verite almost kind of style.
The problem with shooting, especially Fiend, was that, and I remember Don saying this because, you know, of course, for one thing, you have actors working for free and all that. You don't want to keep them there. You don't want to call them back, you know, because something is out of focus and so forth and so on. But Don was, you don't shoot anything out of focus. We can't. You know, have any of that, any mistakes like that, because we can't call people back. We don't have the film to do it and that kind of thing. And so there was a little bit of terror involved in that. Now, I'm proud to say, though, after 2 movies, I got one shot out of focus in both those movies. And thankfully, it was a close-up of his cat in Fiend, which, of course, was easy enough to set up because the cat's just... but everything else, I mean, I had, you know, the measuring tape, I had everything. I was trying to shoot wide, you know, just to help the focus aspect of it. Nightbeast was a little bit easier because there was a fair amount of outside stuff during the day. And, you know, you could go with the generally, you know, wide lens and you would be fine on focus. But we did have the dolly that we were using. So, of course, that added to, you know, the measuring of distances and all that. But that was the big fear. You know, I mean, I would love to have made it look like a Kubrick film, but, you know, Kubrick never had a problem with, you know, telling his DP, look, we only have one take on all this stuff, so we're out of focus. That was never a Kubrick problem. And speaking of people like that, I mean, Kubrick was always one of my favorite people too. But yeah, it was really dictated to by how much film we could use and the fact that we could not make any mistake. And of course, coming out of Alien Factor, there's a lot of static shots, and Don had talked about when we went into Fiend that we want to have more of an active camera, even tilting and panning or anything, just so there are not those stock sheriff's office shots. And in fact, in Nightbeast, you know, we had the Argonne Ridge office that we were able to shoot in, which was big enough that we could actually move the camera around in it. And there was lots of space as opposed to the Alien Factor Sheriff's Office, which was essentially, as you're looking at it, it's like 2 walls coming together. And when you watch a wide shot, you can almost see the end of the set, you know, that kind of thing. So, and it was completely, you know, not real. But Nightbeast, that was a real working office. So it was a big help. Sorry to be long-winded about that.
No, that was great.
The key thing is don't make any mistakes. You're praying with every shot. It's not like video where you look back at it right away. you have to wait a couple of days, and you know, this is going to be okay.
No, it
Jamie?
was Nightbeast is definitely. I was going to say Nightbeast definitely is a lot more energetically shot than, especially Fiend. You know, like I mentioned before, Fiend is a lot of indoor locations, and this, yeah, you know, even watching it last night in prep, you know, I was kind of like you said, there was like literally dolly shots and tracking shots, and you know, some interesting stuff going on. There is a small section where it looks like you kind of shot some of it soft focus. You know, so the whites are kind of like blooming and stuff, but it seems like that was kind of abandoned after one scene.
That was the fog filter, right?
Right, that was the fog filter. Yeah, we thought we'd try it, give it a fantasy look, and ultimately, you know, that would have been a good look if you were shooting a perfume commercial, maybe, but not a horror film where you want to see the guts and the blood and the clarity and all that. And that was one of those things where we shot a few things. Comes back a couple of days later, it's like, you know, this isn't going to work. Mm-hmm. So luckily, it wasn't too crazy that it couldn't be used.
Right.
It was close enough, but it does look a little odd. But yeah, that was the filter.
I do want to ask Jamie his kind of inspirations for acting. I know actors have some of the guys they love and people like that, so I'm just curious.
I couldn't do anything else. I sucked. I would have been a used car salesman otherwise. You know, I don't know. Just somewhere along the line, I always had the performer in me in regards to singing and so forth. And then like I said, I think it was in junior high school, I got into a show and the acting bug bit me. And then I pursued it in high school with a couple shows. And I was taking music classes, and then when I went to college, went to Towson University and became a theater major, and did about a year and a half of general requirements, and then went to my teachers, who were also my advisors, and said, if I get a degree from here, what's it going to do for me? And they said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to be a performer. And they said, well, the degree won't do anything to help your career or anything like that. Do you want to be a teacher? This is a teacher's college. And I went, oh, hell no. I don't want to teach anybody. I want to perform. So I dropped all my general requirements. I never graduated. Did. My wife has her rehearsal coming up in about 20 minutes, so I'm going to have to leave in a few minutes anyway. That's why you see that light in the background. But yeah, no, I just, and then come the 80s is when I just kind of threw myself into it and tried to make a profession out of it and get paid for it. Of course, was in dinner theater, a lot of musicals since I was in music, and a few dramas here and there, but mostly musicals and national tours of Can, Gigi, things like that. I had a thing for two-syllable French shows for a while, and then, you know, just tried to stay a working actor all my life, but have had to wait tables a few times.
Any favorite performance?
For 3 years. Pardon?
What's your favorite performance you did, or any favorites you like doing in theater or anything like that?
Oh, shows that I've liked? Well, I've done parts that I've done the most were and enjoyed the most was probably The Pirate King and The Pirates of Penzance. I did that like 4 times. Nothing I love more than somebody who's trying to be suave and debonair, but is actually a klutz, because that's me. I try, but it doesn't work, you know.
Well,
right
James,
now. Go ahead.
You actually performed at the top of the World Trade Center back in the late 90s, didn't you?
Oh, dear God, yes. Yeah, with the Capitol steps.
Yeah.
It was after the first attempt. After they had exploded the truck bomb at the base.
Right.
And I did not want to be there. We were all the way at the top, and I was just like, and I have a fear of heights anyway, and I don't like man-made objects that go straight up in the air, especially that tall. I don't mind if they're like that, because I know they're not going to tip over. But I just was like, we went up for rehearsal. You know, we had to go up and do a sound check, and I just wanted to get the hell out of there, and I got out. Then we came back, we did the show, and I got the hell out again quick and everything. I just felt if they tried it once, they were going to try it again, which they obviously did. devastatingly, of course. But
so what you're saying is I should cancel our reservations for the Space Needle in Seattle, right? Okay.
I won't do it.
So one name I did want to bring up that I don't think he spent any actual time on set, but that is John Dodds, who's also very important to this movie. He was the creature designer for it, and I had talked with him back and forth. Very nice guy, but he has a very funky design sense and apparently loves teeth. Because Nightbeast is full of teeth. He went on to design the Deadly Spawn, which is nothing but teeth. And then he did some stuff for Spookies, the Monsters TV series. So a really unique design, and I think does kind of help give this movie a bit of a funky flavor. Like you look at that mouth of the creature, and like the teeth just don't make any damn sense. They're just like all over the place. I'm like, how does that thing even chew?
Black Roses too has a toothy monster, if I'm not mistaken. At the very beginning, he worked on that, and
right.
I love the teeth. Nothing scarier than a creature without eyes and only teeth. It only wants to do one thing.
Yeah, and it's there's some I've seen some mention that the monster in this is very inarticulate, but it has enough movement. A lot of the shots in the movie were literally just a hand inside the head. It'd have the camera close up. I'm assuming Richard shot a lot of this stuff. Just a close up of the monster as it's going through the woods, but it's literally just a hand inside a puppet head, just opening and closing the mouth as it's moving around, or like just a head on a stick. So they didn't even have somebody inside of that thing for a lot of the shots in the movie. As I'm sure Richard
that happens with a lot of stuff anyway, right? I mean, a lot of movies, you can't have it's not the guy in the suit. You just need a long shot with the guy in the suit or whatever, and then the close-ups are usually animatronic or something, or puppets, or right, Rich?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in that case, all we had to do, I mean, there were sometimes you just put the camera on that dolly we had, and that was an old school dolly with looked like a railroad tracks basically, and those old pump cars. It was that kind of thing. So you would just keep the camera as low as possible, and then have somebody like standing on the dolly, or right walking behind the dolly, depending on the shot. And you would have somebody roll you through the lighting that you had, and then somebody would move the mouth like that. It worked though. I mean, you're looking up at it, so it makes it look powerful, and it's all these teeth, like you say. It worked, and we used to call him Bruce Dodds. I guess he goes professionally by John, but on the set we were calling him Bruce. So I don't know if there's a professional name or whatever the case may be. But yeah, he was a good guy. He came to some Balticon conventions back then, and so I got to meet him. But he was a very pleasant guy, and really talented, and just like you say, he had a unique way of doing things. In fact, I think, I don't know if you remember, Jamie, didn't he do a short film about a character called Grog?
Oh, Grog, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think John Dodds did that.
Yeah, featured in the Cinemagic magazines.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he had a real imagination, real visual sense.
Mm-hmm. Now, was it tough for you, Richard, to shoot some of this, some of the special effects scenes, or even some of the optical scenes? Was there any special consideration taken, as far as lining up those shots and stuff?
Some of the ones where people were getting sapped were just pretty much standard shots. We just kind of set them up and lit them as is, and then when they got shot, they're standing with a gun, and then you see the outline, and boom, they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think. I don't know, Jamie, do you remember, like, when you got electrocuted, like in the scene behind you? Did we do anything unusual camera-wise? Do you recall? I think it was just...
No, I don't recall at all. I really don't. I mean, other than, I'm just holding those wires, and I don't even remember who was on the other end pulling on them for me and all that stuff, and just said, at some point, scream.
Jamie, we don't want to keep you any longer. If you have to go, we completely understand.
I think she's okay. I think my wife stepped in to grab her costume. She might be going to do it on another computer.
Okay, all right.
She's got a rehearsal coming up. Yeah, that's all right. If she needs it, I'll get out of here.
All right. So speaking of your heroic death scene, Jamie, which comes as quite a surprise, honestly. You know, you're kind of, you know, like I said, you're pretty much, you know, one of the main leads in the movie, and then you get nuked along with everybody else. Was there any prep work for your corpse, or was that just something they built completely independently? And
I didn't know about it until afterwards, until I saw the film. I didn't know how I was going to look. I never saw that scene when they were. And I saw it on the film, and I was like, "Oh, there I am! Oh my God!" You know. They even got my shirt on. Okay, yeah.
It's funny.
To me, it was a crispy Muppet, you know.
Right.
Falling.
Was there
Bruce,
any
you were
talk
going down
about
the list of names. Did you have David Donahoe as one of the people you want to speak about? Because we were talking about the pyrotechnic effects, and he was a big Dohler, part of the Dohler family, and he's also featured in Nightbeast as the uncle who
Uncle Dave, right?
Yeah, who's taking a leak and then gets killed.
Is he the one who gets his guts ripped out?
What's that?
Is he the one who gets his guts ripped out? No,
he gets like face ripped, and he's like on top of the car.
Oh, he gets his face ripped out. That's right.
Yeah, but he's also in Galaxy Invader. He's like one of the people like rounded up, you know, the mob to go search for the Galaxy Invader. But you know, in the laser blast scenes, you know, the lasers are put in rotoscoping, but then there's these little explosions that are happening all over the place, and that would have all been rigged by David Donahoe.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, he also burned up the spaceship in the aborted Nightbeast, which was used later in the real in the actual movie. Mm-hmm. But yeah, actually, if you look at the scene where he's yelling at Greg and Kim, there you go. There it is. But the way he talked in that scene when he's yelling at the kids, not that he would ever yell at anybody. He was a very nice guy, but that was the sound of his voice, kind of the cadence that he normally spoke. He wasn't really an actor. I mean, he was just a guy going in there and doing lines.
Right.
And but yeah, he was a good guy, and another guy that was very professional. Because I think Leifert was pretty worried about the gunshot effect when he got killed. But you know, Donahoe never caused any injuries or had any problems. Didn't start any fires. I mean, beyond what the fire he was trying to start, obviously.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, he was a good guy. He was an old pro, and it seemed to me that he was a pilot of like a small airplane too. So he had, you know, he had a lot of good technical skills, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
He plays that
Yes,
ridiculous over the top
totally
role.
Been a
Galaxy Invader, right? Is he drunk the entire time in that movie? The character?
I wasn't on that movie, so I don't know. But I mean, I'm trying to remember. I saw the movie a long time ago.
Yeah, I haven't watched it recently either.
I mean, I remember his character being very memorable, if I'm not mistaken, on that one. He stands out in my mind, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be.
Yeah, in this one, basically, he's just, you know, Don's kids are, look out, Uncle Dave, there's something behind you.
I've had enough out of you kids tonight.
Right.
I'm gonna go check on my wife. I'll be right back.
All right.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that you know, he was a character basically, and you know, you could get an actor to play that character, or you could just get the character. And of course, one of the things about low budget films is that, you know, if you're on the set, you're probably going to end up in front of the camera at some point.
Right.
Because even in Fiend, when I was just shooting that, I showed up one day for some scenes we were going to shoot, and Don came to me and said, we're going to need you to play a distraught neighbor. And I said, well, okay. So I read the lines, learned them, we went out and shot them.
Right.
I had no other character in the film, but hey, you showed up, you have some acting experience, you're in front of the camera.
Hey guys, my wife needs the the camera because she's got rehearsal for a show that she's doing with a company called Play Zoomers, and she starts in about 7 minutes. So I'm going to have to say goodbye. It was great talking to everybody.
Great talking to you.
Thank you for everything.
Thanks for asking. All right. You
Thanks,
guys have
Jamie.
a good time. Take care. I'll
Take
talk
care.
to you. Right. Let's see here. I got to figure out, of course, how to get off. Bye-bye.
So,
so I did want to mention, I guess, I did want to talk about some favorite scenes from the movie.
Exactly what I was going to say, Bruce.
I was going to say, I don't know what you guys had in mind. My favorite bit of the entire movie is when the Nightbeast is going around and George Stover opens the door and looks out, and he sees the Nightbeast, goes, and then just slowly closes the door again. That makes me laugh so hard every single time I watch it.
I think my favorite line when I think back on it, it's just like, it's incredibly like mean-spirited, but also funny at the same time. We're like, we got Bill Perkins and his kid coming. And like later on, his kid gets killed, and then he's like, he killed 5 men, and Bill Perkins' kid, like he keeps bringing up Bill Perkins' kid, like it keeps bringing up like 4. It's like, who's Bill Perkins? Like even she was like, why? Like,
well, is it? And isn't that
weird?
And isn't that Don?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
He said the actor didn't show up, right?
Maybe. Yeah, I don't remember.
But this poor guy gets drug out of bed just to shoot at some alien and his kid dies. Like, I would have not brought my kid for that. I'd be like, you're not coming. Stay home.
It's like, he's so sad, and then he takes some extra time to line up, because he's a crack shot. Remember, they set that up.
He looks like one of the guys in the background on Night of the Living Dead, like Vince who ends up shooting the 2 in the head at the end.
Well, and I love the idea that, basically the sheriff's like, don't even try to shoot the alien, just shoot the gun. They're like, screw that thing, we need that out of here.
Well, they shot him. They had to have shot him at least a couple times. He had no effect. He looks like kind of like the alien kind of reminds me of like a background Master Universe villain, like in the movie. Like he'd be in there, like just standing there, like, because he's kind of freaky looking too. He also looks like the thing from the Willies. If you've ever seen the Willies, they kind of ripped that monster off
in the
for sure.
bathroom.
Yeah, they definitely lifted it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So John, Chris, Richard, any favorite scenes?
Man, I should have rewatched it before this. I mean, honestly, the thing I always, when I think about Nightbeast, is the sex scene. In all sincerity, right. That's like the thing that always is from my mind. So, that's all I'll say.
I just love the scene with Glenn Barnes, Don's brother, and the music of that scene. The way it kind of just like they really kind of draw the suspense of that out, and they have that wah 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 wah, like sound of. I feel like I've seen another movie that had a couple of the same music cues. I'm not sure where Don got the music for some of the scenes, but I've seen them in other movies around that era. Let's see. And
it's so funny because like his character's like he's like looking around all cautiously, and then all of a sudden Nightbeast just pops up out of nowhere and is like, "Roar!" just ripping out guts and stuff. It's great.
Yeah. And and in the Drago scenes, like specifically the scene with Jamie, the fight with them, and apparently there was a scene where they had rigged something to have Jamie like hanging off a cliff, or maybe it was going to be the stuntman Dennis, and I guess the footage came out too yellow, and so they had to scrap that scene. So that could have been pretty epic if that had came out right.
I wonder if they kind of restaged that as that bit where Tom Griffith sort of falls off the cliff and he's hanging on that tree branch or whatever, and then sort of like slides down or whatever. I wonder if that was just, they didn't want to let go of that idea and just sort of like, repositioned it into something else.
Yeah. Yeah, that scene where they're running and that leads to that little cliff scene. That's one of the scenes that shows up in Mandy. I mean, I was so amazed that that Nightbeast showed up in Mandy, because Mandy's such, to me, like a great film and one of my favorites. And I had heard that they were trying to get Alien Factor, and I guess maybe they couldn't get the 7 partners of Alien Factor to agree on it. So then they went with Nightbeast instead, which I think is actually more perfect, because those like kind of crazy mutant bikers that are in Mandy, like to me, Nightbeast kind of gels with the concept of Mandy, like I think a little bit more than maybe Alien Factor would, but I'm not sure what Panos was thinking when he was initially thinking that. But he wanted Don Dohler, clearly. So
Yeah, that was a real surprise. You know, I went and saw Mandy at the oh, what the hell's the name of that theater? The one that it's around the corner of the Charles. It was
Parkway?
like sort of that. Yeah, the Parkway. Yeah. So yeah, Mandy played there. I went and saw that in theaters. Had no idea, and then yeah, just suddenly Nightbeast popped up. I'm like, wait a second, what the hell? Yeah. So very surprised by that.
Yeah, it was a wonderful surprise. Yeah, I just love that Dohler, every once in a while, his movies will just pop up and something new is going on. And, you know, people are still finding his movies. And, you know, I'm just so thankful to have played a part in that.
Right.
And because, yeah, I mean, like some of the cinematic Titanic things, and then Riff Tracks did Galaxy Invader. There's always, every couple of years, something happens with the movies and just keeps that legacy going.
Yeah, Best of the Worst, that YouTube show. You know, they've talked about some Don movies on there, which is always massive exposure considering their audience.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. I mean, it's, you know, it makes me happy. You know, a Baltimore filmmaker other than, you know, John Waters or Barry Levinson or somebody, you know, somebody
right.
who's, you know, cranking out these things.
One of us,
peanuts,
you know.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Something I think Don would have really gotten a lot of satisfaction in is the rescanning of these films, because when they re-released, you know, Alien Factor and Fiend and Nightbeast rescanned, they never looked as good, right. Unless you saw in the theater, because those telecine processes from the 80s and 90s, like, it just did not transfer the films as well. And, you know, so like the DVD I had of Alien Factor, it just looked a little murky. It just wasn't, it had this kind of amateurish look to it. And then when the Blu-ray came out, I was blown away by the shadow detail and the quality of the film. You know, it really gives I think the films a new life.
And that has to be especially rewarding for you, Richard. I mean, you know, you put this time and care into the look of the movies, and then, you know, they're sitting around from old video masters for 30 years until they finally got it remastered. So I imagine that's been a really nice thing for you.
Yeah, it almost gives the illusion I knew what I was doing at that because they made it look good. But yeah, you're right. He would love to see that. And it's just kind of amazing, just the technology in general. Having seen it, you know, on like Alien Factor originally as the first, seeing that on a big screen, and you know, it kind of has a grainy kind of quality, and then it goes on. It went into that one sci-fi package and ended up on TBS, you know, and you know, it looked good, but still not like today, you know. And then it was on VHS, and it still has that grainy look. And now it's like, wow, this is, you know, I had something to do with that, you know. It actually looks pretty good.
Yeah, I think another interesting detail that it's either in B Movie Horrors or Dohler spoke to me about it, was that when he sold Nightbeast to Troma, like, he didn't want to do it. It was the other partners that wanted to sell. And I guess because they thought, well, you know, this might be their last chance to make money from the film, because they saw it as this film that was, at that time in the 90s, that was about 10 years old. Maybe there was less interest in it. And little could they have known that it was going to have, you know, this, you know, potential second life. And if they had just kind of held on to it, you know, they could have been involved in making, you know, some of the deals with, like, you know, Mandy and, you know, the rescanning with Vinegar Syndrome, or, you know, whatever. Although maybe Vinegar Syndrome wouldn't have it, because you said that was like an exclusive Troma deal. But certainly, like, with the other films being rescanned, you know, there would have been interest.
Right. Yeah, and it kind of makes you sad that, you know, he had sent all the elements off for Blood Massacre, and, you know, they've kind of gone missing for, you know, ever since, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's the crazy one. That's the weirdest one of them all.
I know. Yeah. That's probably my second.
Forever locked as a sort of VHS treatment, I guess.
Right, because even I know you worked a bit on that, John, sort of reconforming, you know, the film, because I think the main version that we know, is from a work print, I believe. I think the original VHS release was from a work print.
Yeah, I think the distributors released the film in 1991 on VHS from the work print, and you know, it was incomplete. Dohler had not completed the film, and then while I was making the documentary, Don was making another deal where it was going to be part of a pack, Serial Psychos or something, and so he started the work to cut it down, clean up some of the shots, add some new music, and I never put this in the documentary, but once again he was rushed. Like suddenly he got a call from the distributors like, we need this, like next week, and so he quickly finished it. And then if you pick up the Serial Psycho's release of Blood Massacre, you'll see that the mix is kind of crazy. There's this new, more modern music that maybe it didn't really kind of mesh. And so after Dohler had passed away, I brought this up with Greg Dohler and I said, hey, look, I think that, Don was rushed again. What if you and I got together and we kind of talked out what's working from this new cut, what's not working? One of the things that Don did is he cut down the blood makeout scene. I thought too much. There was, so we tried to find a sweet spot of like, because like letting that scene kind of go on for too long is part of what makes it make you kind of squirm when you're watching it. And so Greg and I sat down at in front of the editing computer and worked it out of what we thought would be the definitive cut of Blood Massacre. And then I sent him away with a master DV cam version of that, and I think that's the version that is on the Massacre video. It's like the Easter egg in the Fiend Massacre video, Blu-ray.
I'm not sure I saw that cut. I don't know which cut I saw. I saw it a long time ago, so I'll have to rewatch that.
There's technically three cuts. There's the original VHS cut, which is very long. It's got this extended dream sequence, and then there's the Serial Psychos cut, and then there's the cut Greg Dohler and I did.
Well, and then there's also floating around some of the footage from the original shot on video version, where they decided partway through the shoot, after shooting some of the stuff on video, they decided to go back and refilm it all on film.
Is your documentary widely available anymore?
I think you can watch it on Tubi. I think Troma's got it on Tubi.
Be nice to get a nice release.
I like went on Letterboxd one day, and I guess I glanced at Blood Massacre or Blood Boobs Beast, and I was like, why is it getting all these reviews? These recent reviews. And then Troma, I haven't talked to them very much. I just let them do whatever they want to do with the film. So I didn't even realize it was on to me. But for a while, it was on like Hulu. It got some pretty good coverage in the early days of streaming.
It was a huge miss. It wasn't on the Nightbeast Blu-ray from Vinegar Syndrome. Like, why? Why didn't they? It was such a miss.
Yeah. I gave them some additional footage that I guess I didn't use, and so they cut together, some special features from some of that footage.
Yeah, that feature actually ended up being really cool because it's almost kind of a chronicle of the aborted Nightbeast as much as it is, the finished Nightbeast. It really kind of goes through the story of that a bit, just from all the outtakes from your original interviews. So, yeah, I was very happy that we were able to get some of that stuff on there. Yeah, I wish I could have did more for that Blu-ray. I did a couple interviews and helped orchestrate a couple things, but at the end of the day, like, I really wanted to get something new with George Stover on there, but our production window was so short that he had an upper respiratory infection at the time, so I couldn't get him on there. I wanted to do something with Chris Gummer, but unfortunately, it's just we ran out of time. It's typical with Vinegar Syndrome. They'll tell you like a year in advance, oh hey, we might be doing this down the road, and then they'll be like, hey, can you turn in your extras in 2 weeks? And I'm like, I haven't worked on anything. Like, what do you like? Jesus. But whatever. That's the way it goes. I say this as I have a commentary track due at the end of next week that I literally just got the deadline for last week.
Richard, what's your favorite Don Dohler movie?
I think Nightbeast is in a lot of ways because the pacing and the overall feeling. I don't know. It just seems to flow so beautifully, like you were talking about before with all the excitement at the beginning, the gun battles and all that stuff. It dives right into it and just stays that way pretty much all the way to the end. I mean, I like Fiend also because it was kind of a different sort of movie. It was very small, very intimate, and that kind of thing. But Nightbeast was the one that really felt like, I hate to say it, but like a real movie. So that would be it.
I do want to mention the one part in Fiend, which I absolutely love, is the guy's wife's like, leave him alone, don't go over there. And then right when he walks out the door, he sees the guy, the Fiend, he just beelines right for him, walks across like 3 driveways to him. It's like, I told him, he's just like, just goes right to him. But that's just a crazy plot. Like, it's like, you're right, that guy's bad, but no one else believes you. So it's like the Burbs. It's the pre-Burbs.
Right. So Chris, isn't Fiend your favorite Dohler movie too?
I like Fiend a lot, but I'm gonna say I think I like the truly bizarre nature of Blood Massacre, and the idea of seeing Stover as the heavy is probably probably gonna go Blood Massacre. But I do really like Fiend a lot. I just feel like it's like I don't know. There's something about the atmosphere in it that just feels really like, and because it's a smaller movie, feels really just extra creepier in the context of like I don't know.
Well, that one's Fiend's interesting because it's like it's almost like his Don's Blue Velvet. A look at just the sinister underpinnings of a small town. Like the secrets in this small town.
And I also like the idea of something like it's the whole sort of like because the like sort of Renfield character, like the whole like it all feels very Dracula-esque, but to the point earlier. What is the Fiend? Like, why does he come to this graveyard? It makes no sense. It's never really clarified. So it's like, it just feels like this whole other mythology, that like very, very, the rest of the movies in that filmography are pretty standard sort of like, okay, alien invader comes down. There's a lot more ambiguity there, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I forgot that I wanted to mention when we were talking about like the pool party scene and stuff in Nightbeast, just the similarity, you had mentioned, the Renfield character, taking from other properties. Just the whole mayor character, like refusing to evacuate the town and stuff. It's like a low budget Jaws, but they couldn't. They didn't want to go to Ocean City, so they just have him at his pool. It's just like we got people around the water somehow. So let's just have a pool party for the mayor.
Should have killed the governor. They should have killed the governor.
Yeah. Chris mentioned Stakes earlier, and I think of the later Dohler films, Stakes is one of my favorites. And it's almost, maybe it's even the Nightbeast of the later films because it's very effects heavy. It's pretty fast paced. It's very imaginative. And maybe it's the Dohler movie that is like most ambitious in its kind of scope. Because it's like they're jumping these universes, and then they have this like big battle on the catwalk. So I don't know. I just thought it was worth mentioning some of Dohler's later films.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I was going to say too, I think for the later movies don't get talked about as much because there's not that, like, I do think that sort of early 2000s nostalgia will be in vogue soon. And I think the Joe Ripple Dohler movies, like, I love Dead Hunt. Like, Dead Hunt is, like, actually, I'm not going to lie, that might be my favorite, but it seems a little bit blasphemous. But, like, I do really love Dead Hunt a lot. Because I think there's something about, and I also think it's really special, this idea of, like, Blues Brothers style getting the band back together. Like, Don having that big gap between making those movies and then, like, being way more of, like a veteran filmmaker, being, all right, we'll do this again, is really, I think that's really, like, I hope I'm still making low budget monster movies with my friends when I was in my 50s, so hopefully I will.
It's like when Tom Cruise
and
came
the
back.
Time Warp films are not widely available.
Yeah,
they're not. Yeah, because they came out initially through well, there was some weird label that was like a weird like it was something like Chesapeake Releasing or something that seemed like someone was starting their own distribution or something. But then they got licensed to Brain Damage, which that's how I first saw Blood Massacre, because the Serial Psychos box set was Brain Damage. But Brain Damage is a terrible distributor. So
I actually think I might have seen Blood Massacre earlier than I thought I did, because I saw that Serial Psychos too originally, and that had to be close to 15 to 20 years ago. Probably saw that, so maybe I saw it before Nightbeast. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I mean they should do like a Time Warp Films box set, and even if they don't do that, these films should be on Tubi or streaming,
Right.
I don't think.
Yeah.
Maybe
like
none
Saturn
of
Score releases.
Or like Visual Vengeance or somebody. Yeah, I'm surprised they haven't.
Those two for sure. Well, Visual Vengeance probably fits more with it.
Yeah, I'm surprised somebody like that hasn't jumped on them yet.
Although I do wonder, I mean, like, I feel like Joe is not really how John. I'm not sure how often you talk to Joe still, but like I call Joe every year or two to check in, and like he is so removed because Joe Ripple now runs this basically a nonprofit, Scares the Care, that helps raise money for like various like charities, but like through horror stuff. And I always got the vibe in the last couple of years he wasn't interested in sort of like doing like relicensing or back catalog stuff. Like he made a movie that never even came out, Jebediah, like a slasher, or maybe it came out on Amazon. It was like a slasher Amish movie.
Yeah,
but that was
didn't they make like 3 films? I feel like that Time Warp, you know, Joe and you know some of the people that were involved in Time Warp, they made 2, maybe even 3 films. One of them was called Sealed Fates. I remember Jebediah.
Sealed Fates. Yeah, Jebediah, and then they finished Crawler last year, 2 years ago or something like that. But that wasn't a true Time Warp. I mean, Time Warp, but not Joe by himself.
Right. Yeah, they made a couple more films, and then I guess Joe went on to Scares the Care, and then he became a dad. So you know he's just been pulled in this other direction, and I think as a result, like these Time Warp films have, you know, not kept up with like the streaming availability.
Yeah, no, I think he lost interest in it. But it's funny too. I think about that a lot. Where and I don't have kids, but like I think about that a lot when like I would meet filmmakers like Don or like people that made stuff when they're in their 20s or 30s, and then I'm meeting them as a kid, you know, this is like early 90s, early 2000s, being like, why'd you stop? And like I realized there's this thing where it's like, yeah, dude, my life happened. And I think that's the thing that always is a little bit like, oh man, I get that now, like having like a career and still trying to scrape out time to do this. Like if I had kids, I couldn't fucking do this. But like it's so interesting that the moments you captured, John, like him talking about that in Blood, Boobs, and Beast is like so like that is the best portrait I think I've seen of like a horror filmmaker in documentary form, because it really talks about the psyche of doing those things, you know.
Yeah,
and like Don why you do them like, ultimately. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say Don made it work by trying to include his family, making his family a part of the
exactly.
Yeah, like in the movies. You know, Greg, you know, running the clapper and sound, you know, he just made it a family affair. Yeah, so cool. And I was also, you know, I was interested in being involved in this podcast because of the 1982 premise, because I've always felt that 1982 was like this, around that time between like 79 to like 83, there's this sweet spot for me with films. And there was this documentary miniseries, 1982, you know, Geek, you know,
yeah,
I can't remember the title, but
films or something like that from NBC.
Yeah. And 82, there's definitely something to that. It was like Blade Runner, The Thing, you know, Indiana Jones, which one? The Temple? No, was it Raiders of the Lost Ark or no? Maybe there is an Indiana Jones that year. I don't remember, but
Raiders is 81, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, yeah, it was. But you know, all around that in that time, it was like post New Hollywood. And before things got like super commercialized and franchised, like I feel like there was this kind of sweet spot in filmmaking, and maybe it's like more the emergence of like independent filmmakers like Don and you know others. But yeah, I mean, how did you guys come to decide to do a 1982 series?
Well, I actually started doing 1980. I started at 80. My friends.
Oh, so you're just going through the years.
My friends, and they would draw random retro years. So they did 80, and I said, you know what? I ended up dropping out of that show, and it was just way too busy. But I ended up doing 1980, and then I did 81, and then I do 82, and then I'm going to do the entire 80s, and I'll do the 70s, and then until I die. I don't know how far I'll get along, but it's just nice. And I'm digging deep. I'm watching Indonesian movies and getting AI subtitles. So I'm going as deep as I can because I want to actually do something that maybe a lot of people wouldn't do, and give every movie the time of day. You know, not just the ones that everybody sees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, but you did 80 by yourself. You didn't really start, or no.
You were on there.
I was gonna say you did start bringing in some guests during 80. Yeah, because I did Cannibal Apocalypse for 80. Yeah. But yeah, it's fun. You only did like a handful of guest videos for the 80, and then 81 was bigger, and now 82. You've done like 25 episodes or something ridiculous, special episodes.
Like but 83, I probably won't be as big because I think that there's a drop-off point in a lot of the movies that people want to discuss in 83. I think 82 has a lot more, and 81 especially. But anybody have any last words on Nightbeast?
Let me see. I don't think I jotted down anything else.
Kept Richard way too long. I don't want to suck up all his
Well, I think it's worth noting that me and Bruce went to high school together.
We did.
I remember Bruce was the guy in the hallways that had a video camera and was filming his friends, and people were like, he's making a zombie movie, you know, outside school hours, you know. Like, so Bruce was that guy in my high school.
Yeah,
That
so
movie ever come out?
Hell no.
I got my first crappy movie out.
I was gonna say I don't even know where any of the footage or any of those old shorts, but I mean, literally, that was, you know, me and my friends every weekend. You know, we just run around making little shorts or just do music videos or whatever the hell we felt like doing. And it's funny, you know, John, because I think you're what, a year or two younger than me. I remember John was like in my art class. And like he'd be doing like these like really cool drawings or illustrations and stuff. And meanwhile, I'm like sculpting bongs, like telling the teacher they're like vases and stuff. Just like so, yeah, it's really funny. Never once did we talk about Don Dohler until later in life. And it's funny, I actually so before going into this episode, I was fully expecting you to say you got into Don Dohler based on his underground comics work. You know, just looking at the other documentaries you had done. Which, I mean, I guess we could mention those as well since you're on here. So, you know,
I had seen Crumb, the documentary. And so that was basically the only thing I knew about underground comics was from that documentary. And then when I, you know, learned more about Don Dohler's story and knew that he had this backstory, you know, working in fanzines as a teenager, you know, the mimeographed things, and that, as children, some of the underground cartoonists like Jay Lynch and Skip Williams and Art Spiegelman were contributing to his fanzine. You know, learning that story, you know, was like, oh, that's gonna make his story more interesting for the documentary. And then that led me down a path of meeting some of these other cartoonists like Skip Williams and Jay Lynch, and then eventually Justin Green. I just finished a documentary about Justin and his wife Carol Tyler, who were this kind of you know, really notable comics couple, you know, in the comics scene, but you know, obscure in the mainstream, but you know, their influence, you know, huge. So you know, they were kind of perfect, you know, and just really needed a documentary. And so yeah, so I was actually at that time I was more interested in films and horror films and stuff, and you know, learning about Dohler kind of led me more down the path of learning about underground comics. And in fact, one little interesting story about Dohler. When I first met him at the Perry Inn, which was the bar he liked to drink in, I think he was just checking this, you know, he gave me kind of a bit of a test to see if, you know, if I was just some joker who didn't know, you know, what I was talking about. He started like throwing out movie names of, you know, to see if I, you know, had done my homework. And I'm trying to remember, like he asked me if I'd seen Killers from Space, which was like kind of that bug-eye, you know, movie, and then Monolith Monsters, which was like a meteorite hits the earth, and when it rains, it comes these towering rocks that crash and destroy. And he was really surprised that I had seen that one. And I think he might have mentioned the film Without Warning, which I hadn't seen at that point.
That's a great 1980.
Which came out a year or two before. Yeah,
right.
And,
great movie, actually.
Yeah, I mean, and I didn't see Without Warning till a couple years ago. And when I watched it, I was like, I kind of feel like you could see some influence on Nightbeast.
I could see that.
Richard,
yeah.
Do you remember
Without Warning had a weird
Don ever
release.
talking about Without Warning?
I don't recall that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's been 50 years now, so I mentioned I forgot it. But that's an interesting point. But I don't ever remember him talking about that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
kind of like a proto Predator almost.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, it is definitely.
the alien comes to
Same
Earth
actor.
hunting people. Yeah, Kevin Peter Hall, I think his name
Yeah,
is.
he's the alien. Didn't that movie only technically get a theatrical, and it never got a home video release?
No, it didn't. Yeah,
for
it
years.
didn't hit video in the U.S. until I think the Scream Factory
Yeah.
Blu-ray. Honestly, I
Yeah,
don't think
so
it
that
was
movie
even.
was very hard to see for years.
Yeah, it wasn't on VHS. It wasn't on DVD. It did eventually pop up on
Monsters
on,
HD, didn't it?
Yeah, I was gonna say MGM HD and stuff, like
Yeah,
MGM
something like
remastered
that.
the print, so it did start hitting cable in the 2000s.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was never a U.S. home video release. I think the first time I saw it was a dupe of a Japanese tape, I believe.
Amazing cast too.
Yeah, Jack Palance and whoever the hell else is in it.
Martin Landau.
It has Martin Landau.
Yeah, Martin Landau,
and Cameron
right.
Mitchell,
Bruce,
and Ralph Meeker's in there.
Yeah.
It's Ralph Meeker. Yeah. I was confused. Like, is it Ralph Meeker or is it the other guy, Aldo Ray? But it's Ralph Meeker in that one.
So yeah, I don't think I have anything else in my notes.
I think I'm good.
Richard, is there anything you want to say to fans of the movie that are still discovering this thing after all these decades?
Well, I say this every time that, you know, I'm just so thankful that people have, you know, hung on to this. We would never have thought at the time that 50 years later that people would still be talking about the alien factor. I mean, it was just a fun movie. We put it out there. Of course, that when that was made, that was maybe at the very beginning of home video. It'd be like 76, 77 when they started selling VCRs and betas and all that. So that might have, maybe if we'd made it 10 years later, let's say, we might have thought it would last for a long time because you have home video. But it is just absolutely amazing that people stay with it, and especially you guys, because you know everything about these movies, stuff that I've forgotten. And it's just wonderful. I'm so happy. And I'm hoping that Don is somewhere watching all this, because he would be just thrilled that his name, because I mean, this is like with no money,
right?
That he pulled this stuff off, and here we are pushing 50 years for the alien factor, and everybody's still hanging with it. So I'm just thankful of everybody who is keeping this alive, because it is a lot of fun. It wasn't that we just got paid to go out and do something, you know, for a day's work or whatever. We did it because we loved it. Started with Cinemagic magazine, you know, and, you know, anytime you do something with that much love and that much passion, and you have that kind of a dream for the fact that everybody, I think that's part of the reason why people like it, is because they can sense that, you know, it's not just people picking up a paycheck to play a role, or, you know, it's just another job as a DP or something. You did it because you really loved it. You wanted to do interesting things and all that. And so, yeah, I'm very thankful, not just you guys, but all the people buying the Blu-rays and the DVDs and everything else. So it's been fantastic. It's just, I love it.
Well, thank you very much for doing this. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And John and Chris, do you guys want to pimp your most recent stuff? I mean, John, you had alluded to your most recent documentary, Married to Comics, but that actually won the best documentary feature at San Diego Comic-Con, which is a pretty big deal. So congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and you can watch it on Tubi, you know, with ads, or, you know, if you don't want to watch it with ads, you can watch it on Amazon. So, yeah, and there's actually a little Dohler crossover, because Art Spiegelman and Justin Green worked on a Pro Junior character together, and so there's a moment where you see the Pro Junior comic that says Don Dohler's Pro Junior. So, you know, there's, in all three of my movies, there's a little, each one of the subjects, Skip Williamson, Justin Green, Don Dohler, they all mix into the movie, so they're all connected actually.
So if folks have Shudder, they can watch my movie WNUF Halloween Special on Shudder as part of their subscription model. But if you watch that and want more, there's the sequel, Out There Halloween Mega Tape, which you can buy directly from us at WNUFHalloweenSpecial.com or through TerrorVision, who put out a nice Blu-ray. And
with a brief cameo from a fatter, hairier me.
Yes, look out for Bruce in the Exterminator ad.
Yeah, I am a famous one-armed bug exterminator, cross-eyed bug exterminator.
I was gonna say, if you also ever want to hear Bruce's high school, college ska punk band Subsist, you should pick up the TerrorVision Blu-ray of President's Day, my film President's Day, because Subsist is on the soundtrack, and that's how I met Bruce, doing the soundtrack for that.
Yeah, I think.
But
Chris,
what I will say.
So hold on, wait, we should probably tell that story real quick. So I was in the band in the mid to late '90s, a ska punk band. And I get some random email from some kid just being like, "Oh, hey, I love your band. I'm making a horror movie. Would you mind if we used your music on the soundtrack?" And I'm like, "No, great, go ahead. Whatever." So they have the premiere of the movie. Like, I get this other email, "Hey, our movie's done. We're having a premiere at whatever theater it is. If you guys want to come down, it's So we're like, cool. So me and some other guys go down, and we meet up with Chris. Chris is like 13 or something at the time. 14. So it's like this 14-year-old kid, and we're talking to him, and I'm watch the movie. I'm like, oh, this kid has a pretty good eye. This is actually a pretty cool little movie. He made this like 45-minute little slasher movie with just a bunch of his 8th grade friends or whatever. I said that's really cool of him to do. And he's like, hey, we're having some people back at my parents' house afterwards. If you guys want to show up, and we're like, okay. So we drove over there. And it's like just us who are like I'm like 20, and it's like a bunch of 14-year-olds, and like his parents are giving out like cake and ice cream and stuff, and we're just like, what the hell is this? At the time, Chris was like shorter than me, and I'm only like 5'7". And meanwhile, he's like he towers over me by like a foot. So it was just a really unique experience. But yeah, it's been nice to
That's so funny.
see Chris grow as a filmmaker. As years have gone on, and honestly grow in popularity too. I'm happy other people are catching on. I was
gonna say, Bruce, you are so much of a film school for the really exploitative horror films that I would fall in love with very rapidly. But I should mention one of the things to tie it to Dohler again is George Stover. So obviously you mentioned frequently today. He is actually the new WNUF spinoff we're doing called Trick or Treat with Reed Richmond. That'll come out in August. But George it's the most screen time he's ever had. It's literally like a Sci-Fi Channel in the 90s did a History of Halloween special. So it's all sort of like this fake alternate universe with like commercials and George Stover talking about mummies and vampires and werewolves.
I'm in. Sold.
Yeah, I still need to watch the new WNUF. I bought it. I haven't watched it yet.
Oh, nice. Thanks, man.
Yeah, I had to buy it. I pretty much, I used to buy all your movies, It's been a while. I don't think I rebought the old Terrorvision ones, but I remember Witch's Brew was a lot of fun.
Well, I was going to say, I haven't been back to Cinema Wasteland since 2010 or 2011.
I think you're in one of those videos. I remember you being in those videos. I used to film all the videos. You're in the video. You're probably only like, what, 26? I'm probably like 25.
About that. Yeah. It's probably me really embarrassing myself.
Probably get canceled for all the crap we said in those videos because we're only like in our 20s just saying offensive, stupid crap because we're kids.
Do you want to mention your wife's new movie too?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. Sorry. So I wrote a movie that my wife directed called For Sale by Exorcist. It was funded by Dread Central, Epic Pictures. That is on. Oh my God. Well, there's this whole crazy thing right now with Amazon. So Amazon, they won't accept it right now because they think it's an actual documentary. It's a documentary about a real estate agent that flips haunted houses. And Amazon's acquisitions model right now is actually an AI bot. So they won't believe that this is not a documentary. But it's on oh my God, it's on Apple TV. It's on a couple other streaming services, just not Amazon. So. But For Sale by Exorcist, yeah. And then if anybody's close to Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, we'll be there for Blobfest in July. Our band plays the Friday Night Runout, and then Melissa, my wife, is a horror host, Aurora Borealis. So
your band with the guitar player from my old band.
Yeah, so Brian, bringing it all back, Brian played in Subsist, and Brian's the guitar player in Beach Crew.
It's so funny. Did you? So not to completely take this show off the fucking rails like we have been. Did you see? So Kevin Bacon was in the Criterion Closet, and during his time in there, when he's just picking movies, because you've seen the Criterion Closet videos, right? Of just like people picking movies and talking about them and stuff. He picks The Blob and talks all about Blobfest and how bad he wants to go to Blobfest someday because he's a Philly guy. So yeah, it's like I can't believe that none of the people from the Colonial or Blobfest have like taken that video and run rampant with it.
Dude, I'm gonna write a note right now. Oh my God, I'm gonna make sure he comes this year.
But yeah, like yeah.
Myself. Hit up Kevin Bacon.
Right. Yeah. Note to self. Right.
Yeah. His son used to be in like a crust punk band that played Barclay House, which is always really funny to me.
Oh, that's hilarious. I probably saw him.
Yeah. But all right, well that went off.
Yeah, I was gonna say if Dave's used to anything, it is me going off on tangents. So
we got to wrap up in 5 minutes, Bruce. Only 30 seconds on each movie.
Whatever. Look, you invite me on a podcast, I'm going to talk. That's all.
I know. That's what you're supposed to do. I appreciate everybody being on here. Thank you again, Richard. It was great. A lot of good information.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody. John. Yeah, you too, John, man. Thank you. Tons of information. Chris, you didn't do anything. I'm just. no, it was great. It was great. I appreciate it, Chris.
Thanks, Ben.
I bet this. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
See you guys.